Members of council, if you can please take your seats. This meeting is now resumed. Members, can you please rise for a moment of silence and during this time remember Trista Jennifer Wong Smee. Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to thank the men and women that are here with us, Toronto paramedics, EMS, all the different names, and I rise for us to remember Trista Smee. Her husband, Blake Smee, is here. He's also an employee of the city, works in the parks. They've got 3 little kids. Daughter Kennedy, Cohen, Kyle. Trista passed away last summer from cancer, and we're holding a tribute to her, and I want to thank everybody for the moment of silence. I also want to thank the Chief McCackern, and all his crew that are here today. Really appreciate having you here, and her partner, Louis Yang, that worked with her over the summertime. Thank you, and if any of the members of council want to pay their respects, they'll be upstairs in the members' lounge. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Mayor Tory.
Well, I just wanted to thank Councillor Karygiannis for making the arrangements to have some of our men and women here today from the EMS, including the Chief. I think this is no surprise to us who have the degree of familiarity we do with our first responders, that when one is lost, this is something that very much affects all of the others. And I think it's a mark of that kind of unity and solidarity and caring for one another, which happens in the field every day, but also is happening today, that they're here to honor the memory of Trista Jennifer Wong Smee, and to have a chance to demonstrate their condolences for Blake, who I had a chance to meet, her husband, and we chatted about their children, and he's left not only to contend with his own loss, but of course to oversee these relatively young children, the oldest of whom is 13, and dealing with that. But I'm sure, Blake, that it is a comfort to have your colleagues who are here with you today, as I'm sure they are every day, and I hope that it's a small comfort to you to know that we appreciate the service that your late wife gave to the city. We appreciate the service that you give to the city, because you're also a public servant working with us in the City of Toronto government, and we appreciate as well the service that is given day in and day out by all of her colleagues who have shown up here today to show solidarity with you and to support you. And so I just thank you all for coming, and that you know that you have the sincere condolences of all the members of Toronto City Council, and I know all the people of the City of Toronto who very much appreciate the service that you render. There's nothing like the experience that I know Councillor Karygiannis has had, and probably a number of others in this chamber, of going out with you, as I have done, on the road to see what you confront and the things you see and the help that you give and the comfort that you bring to cases kind of big and small every day, and we appreciate that, as we appreciated the service rendered by Trista. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Councillor Ojimeri, your name is on the screen. Is it to speak on this item? Oh, okay. All right. Mayor Tory, I understand you wish to address council.
Yes, I do, just on one other very important matter, Madam Speaker, and that is, and I don't even, well, I've got them here, I don't even need the notes, but Winnie Lee has retired, I think, as we all know, and as a condition of her retirement, which actually took effect last week, it was required that she should come back to help attend to urgent business for one day of the City Council meeting. And I think the urgent business is so that we could pay tribute to her. There she is right there. I was just looking around to see, because I hadn't looked to see that she was actually had come in the chamber. I am one of those people, we all arrived here for a first day at some point in time, I arrived here perhaps somewhat unusually, although people like Councillor Shan well, I was going to say, hey, Councillor Hart, but no, he'd been here forever. But Councillor Shen, well, not forever, but for a long time. But people like Councillor Shen and myself, we would walk in this building, and the first time you walked in was the first time you'd walked in, and you didn't know your way around, didn't know a lot of the things that are very important to know about in terms of how you sort of, do your business inside this building. And I can certainly tell you that during my own period of transition 3 years ago, there was nobody who was more helpful to me and explaining all the ins and outs of how this place works, and it is fairly complicated and fairly Byzantine. And she did that and other jobs here for 26 years. And so what we wanted to have was just, I went on your behalf to her office a week or so ago and presented her with a plaque commemorating her service to the City of Toronto. And I think there was another event held where the same plaque was represented again. And so they decided, all of the senior people, and I think probably wisely so, that we would embarrass you by presenting the plaque for a third time. Same plaque. You don't even get 3 of them. And there's no coupon on the back to get you a free anything. But having said that, I think you will know, Winnie, that all of us have a huge amount of respect and affection for you. That your work was extremely valued. I'm sorry to have my back to you, but then I can't. But your work was valued by all of us. Your work was valued by the public service here and by the people of the City of Toronto. And I hope that you have a very happy and healthy and long retirement. And we'll look forward to seeing you back here. And I understand if there are any sort of expense account rules or problems that come up of any kind, that we have your phone number. So that's just a joke, but because she's probably the world's living expert on all of that. But having said all that, we wish you very well, and we thank you for your many years of public service.
Thank you. Well, if any, I see names up there. So is this for something else? Yeah, but is it, the names that I see up there? Okay, that's for quick releases. So so Councillor Karygiannis, you wanted to say?
Madam Speaker, on a personal note, I wish Winnie the best, and I'm looking forward to seeing a beautiful garden in front of the house.
Anybody else? Councillor Thompson would like to hear from Winnie. No, to the podium, Winnie.
I just want to say thank you to everybody, to the kind words, Mayor Tory, to all of the members of council for your support, your encouragement, your trust through the years. I will definitely miss the city. Thank you so much.
Before the recess, Council was debating item EX 27.5. We will return to that item after Council completes the 2 timed items on Toronto Hydro, set for debate after the members' motions. I will now take the release of holds. Please put your name under request to question staff. Councillor Rajamari.
Thank you, Speaker. Page 3. Third item from the top, PG 21.6, Dufferin-Wilson Regeneration Area Study. I have a motion that consideration of this item be deferred until the November 7, 8, and 9 meeting of City Council.
Okay. On page 3, PG 21.6, Councillor Aljamari has a motion on the screen. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Shan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm willing to release the item EX 27.9. I've talked to the staff. It's regularizing Toronto for all, a public education. Sorry, it's page 4, EX 27.9, regularizing Toronto for all, a public education initiative to support civic resiliency. I've talked to the staff and got my questions answered, so I'm willing to release it now.
Okay, on page 4, EX 27.9, Councillor Shan is releasing. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Page 6, GM 2231, a settlement of expropriation of 1229 Ellesmere Road. I simply wanted to rise and release and to thank the staff and thank the negotiating teams to reach a settlement on this item, and that it's of great benefits for all the people who are in need of shelter in my community. I do hope that we could look at perhaps future expansion, maybe add 1 or 2 floors to this building at a later date. Thank you. And I'd like to ask for a recorded vote on this item.
Thank you. So on page 6, GM 22.31, Councillor Thompson is releasing. It's on the screen. Recorded vote.
The item carries unanimously, 41 in favor.
Councillor Shiner.
So, Madam Speaker, on page 7, PG 22.5, inclusion of the City of Toronto's Heritage Register, Midtown and Focus Phase 1 Main Street properties. I'm not releasing it now. I would like to be able to release it later on, but there is a supplemental report which we're waiting for. I know it's here. Which was just circulated over the lunchtime, and I think some members of council wanted to read and see if any questions of the acting chief planner and his report, to see if there's any items they do want to discuss in the council floor, or if they're satisfied with the information in here. So I'll know later on whether I have to can just release it, or if you'd like it held for debate and discussion, then I'll be only too glad to find a time with you all to do that as well. So
Thank
if anyone
you.
has issues which they haven't feel it resolved, please let me know.
Thank you. Councillor Palacio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Page 6, GM 22.34, 1797 St. Clair Avenue West expropriation settlement. And I have a motion that's been drafted by the Chief Corporate Officer and together with the General Manager of Transportation Service, so I'm going to move this motion. And there will be a subsequent report coming back to council on November the 7th and the 8th. Thank you.
Okay, on page 6, GM 22.34, Councillor Palacio is moving an amendment on 1795 St. Clair Avenue West. All in favor? Carried. Item is amended. All in favor? Carried. MM 32.3. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the government management. So Who is, can you give me who it is? Councillor Fletcher,
Yes?
you have a motion that you want to introduce?
Oh, yes, I do. It's right there. Brown liquor license on Queen Street East, please.
Did you hear Councillor Fletcher? I didn't.
Yes, sorry, am I so quiet? Speak-
Oh, okay. So what is it?
It is to introduce the following motion, urgent notice of motion regarding 753 Queen Street East liquor license application, Caribbean Sunset.
Okay, all in favor? Carried. Councillor Layton?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. This is to introduce an item concerning a donation from Toronto Playground Baseball Association to add lights on the third diamond at Christie Pitts. Yay.
That was not convincing. You have to introduce that again.
And the release of some Section 42 money for the cities to contribute. Sorry. And a contribution from Jay's Care. Jay's
Okay,
Cares.
all in favor? Carried. Okay, is that it? Pardon? Councillor Cressy, you're next.
Thank you, Speaker. This is item as a hearing is imminent.
All in favor? Carried. That's it. Okay. MM 32.3. Notice of this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Government Management Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Hold? Okay, it's being held. Yeah, Councillor Fletcher would like to hold it. Yeah. Yeah, we waive referral. Have we waived referral? All in favor? Carried. And so, yes, it's going to be held. Councillor Fletcher. MM 32.4. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. Recorded vote on the referral.
Councillor Robinson, please. Thank you.
Councillor Karygiannis, please.
We're in the middle of a vote to waiving referral.
The motion to waive referral does not carry. The vote is 5 to 37.
MM 32.5. Notice of this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive. Point of order? Yes?
Sorry, I realize that MM 32.4 the referral was not waived. I was just wondering about whether this motion is actually in order.
Yeah, it's in order.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay, where was I? 32.5, notice of this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of recorded vote?
Councillor Carroll, please, and Councillor DiGiorgio.
The motion to waive referral does not carry. The vote is 13 to 29.
MM 32.6. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. Recorded vote.
Councillor DiGiorgio, please. Councillor Bailao. And Councillor Karagianis, please.
The motion to waive referral does not carry. The vote is 12 to 30.
MM 32.7. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. Recorded vote. On a napkin.
Councillor Fragadakis, thank you. And Councillor Cole, please.
Councillor Bailao, please.
The motion to waive referral does not carry. The vote is 13 to 29.
MM 32.8. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. Recorded vote.
Councillor Layton, please.
The motion carries 41 to 1.
On the item, all in favor? Recorded? Recorded vote.
Councillor McMahon, please. Councillor Palacio, we're going to need your vote, please.
Palacio, Councillor Palacio, can we have a quick vote, please? Thank you.
That's That's okay.
The motion carries unanimously, 42 in favor.
MM 32.9. Notice of this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Board of Health. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. Recorded vote.
Counselor Bailao, please.
Counselor Holland, please.
The motion to waive referral carries 34 to 7.
Who said that? Councillor Holliday? MM 3210. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? No? Recorded vote? Recorded vote.
Counselor Layton, please, and Counselor Matlow. Counselor Bailao, please.
Counselor Cole, please.
The motion to waive referral carries 32 to 9.
It's Deputy Mayor Wong. Yes. Oh, please don't point your finger.
Oh, you can give it to Councillor Davis if you're mad at him.
No, I'm not mad. Okay, yeah, where are we? MM 32.11. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the North York Community Council. Two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3212. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3213. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 32.14. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Jeez. Okay. I'm going to give it to Councillor Davis.
It's your turn next, though.
From now on, if you want to hold, just say bingo.
You'll be sorry, man. You'll be really sorry.
Where's Councillor Mamalidi? Oh, he's not here. I knew I was missing somebody. I just wanted to know who I was missing. Okay. MM 3215. Notice of this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Toronto and East York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. This motion relates to an Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario hearing and has been deemed urgent. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. All in favor of the item? Carried. MM 3216. Notice of this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Toronto and East York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. This motion relates to an Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario hearing and has been deemed urgent. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3217. Notice of this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Toronto and East York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. This motion relates to an Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario hearing and has been deemed urgent. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Who is yelling at each other?
Mark's trying to tell me something. I don't understand. Okay, fine. Still move the motion.
MM 32.18. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3219. Notice that this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Toronto and East York Community Council. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. This motion relates to an Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario hearing and has been deemed urgent. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3220. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Recorded? Recorded vote.
Councillor Kelly, please, and Councillor Karygiannis. Councillor Matlow.
Councillor Cole, please. Councillor Cole, may we have your vote, please?
Councillor Karygiannis, your vote, please.
The motion to waive referral carries 39-4.
On the item, who said hold? Councillor Thompson? I didn't hear bingo. MM 3221. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Okay, carried. Councillor Holiday is holding. It's a false call, Councillor Mihevik. MM 3222. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Planning and Growth Management Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. Recorded vote.
Councillor Karygiannis, please, and Councillor Davis. Councillor Perruzza, your vote, please.
Councillor Mihevik and Councillor Holland, please. Councillor Holliday, thank you.
The motion to waive referral carries 30 to 13.
On the item, hold, Councillor Wong Tam. MM 3223. Notice of this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3224. Notice of this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Public Works and Infrastructure Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. Recorded vote.
Councillor Davis, please, and Councillor Karygiannis. Councillor McMahon, Councillor Layton, when you're seated, please, and Councillor Perruzza.
The motion to waive referral carries 36 to 6.
Councillor Robinson. But you have to say it when you get bingo, not after bingo's been called. MM 3225. Pardon? I heard you.
We're just over here, we're acknowledging your vast expertise in the field of bingo rules.
Yeah. MM 3225. Notice of this motion has been given. This motion is subject to a referral to the Executive Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Yep. Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3226. Notice of this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Community Development and Recreation Committee. A two-thirds vote is required to waive referral. Just a sec. Yes, Councillor Grimes?
This isn't deemed urgent, but this is urgent. Can we have that deemed urgent? It's urgent. This is urgent to deal with this. This is urgent to deal with.
Okay, hold on. We have to vote on if we're going to waive referral first. Yeah. All in favor of waiving referral? Recorded vote.
Councillor Fletcher, please.
The motion to waive referral carries 36 to 7.
Councillor Grimes. Councillor Grimes has bingo. It was a full card. MM 3227. I'm an expert. I used to call. MM 3227. No, I don't, not anymore. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A 2/3 vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Pardon? Recorded vote.
If you have questions, you have to hold it. Speaker, you know that. It's not her job to answer your question.
Councillor Perruzza, Councillor DeGiorgio, Councillor McMahon, please. Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Karygiannis, and Kelly, please.
Always 2 steps ahead, whether you're going in the right direction or not.
Councillor Kelly and Councillor Karygiannis, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 43 in favor.
MM 3228. Notice if this motion has been given. This motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A 2/3 vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3229. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A 2/3 vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3230. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Executive Committee. A 2/3 vote is required to waive referral. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3231. Notice if this motion has been given, this motion is subject to referral to the Toronto and East York Community Council. A 2/3 vote is required to waive referral. This motion relates to a Toronto local appeal body hearing and has been deemed urgent. All in favor of waiving referral? Carried. On the item, all in favor? Pardon? Recorded? Recorded vote. On the item, yeah.
Councillor Shiner, please. Councillor Madlow, Councillor Lee, Councillor McMahon, Councillor DeGiorgio, Councillor Perruzza, please.
Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Cole, please.
Councillor Lee, Councillor Shiner, and Councillor Perruzza, please.
Where am I not? The item carries 42 to 1.
MM 3232. Notice if this motion has not been given, a 2/3 vote is required to waive notice. This motion is subject to referral to the Etobicoke York Community Council. A 2/3 vote is required to waive referral. This motion relates to a Toronto local appeal body hearing has been deemed urgent. Councillor Palacio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to ask the indulgence of Council to withdraw this motion.
So you'd like to withdraw it?
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Palacio is asking to withdraw. On favor? Carried. MM 3233. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agenda and is before council for debate. All in favor of the item? Carried. MM 3234. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. All in favor of the item? Recorded vote.
Councillor Layton, Councillor Wong Tam, Councillor DeGiorgio and Peruzza, please. Councillor Karygiannis, please.
Counselor Fletcher and Counselor Crawford, please. And Counselor DiCiano, please.
Councillor Peruzza, please.
Sorry, Counselor Fletcher and Counselor DiCiano, please. That's okay.
The item carries unanimously, 43 in favor.
MM 3235. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. All in favor of the item? Carried. MM 3236. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. All in favor? All in favor? Carried. MM 3237. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3238. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. All in favor of the item? Carried. MM 3239. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. All in favor of... Pardon? Recorded? Okay.
There's a lot of culture and creativity in my house. No.
Councillor Peruzza, Councillor DeGiorgio, Councillor Davis, Councillor Mallow, Councillor Karygiannis, please.
Counselor Grimes, Counselor Burnside, please.
Councillor Peruzza, please. Councillor Matlow.
The item carries 36 to 7.
MM 3240. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 3241. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. Hold. Councillor Robinson. MM 32.42. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to agendas before council for debate. All in favor? The item carried. MM 32.43. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. All in favor? Carried. Who said hold? Nobody? I thought I heard somebody. MM 32.44. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. On the item, hold. Councillor Coe is holding. MM 32.45. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. All in favor? Carried. Now, the last few are the ones that were just circulated and we voted on. So MM 32.46. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. All in favor of the item? MM 32.47. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agenda as before council for debate. On the item, all in favor? Carried. MM 32.48. This motion has been deemed urgent by the chair. This motion is not subject to a vote to waive referral. This motion has been added to the agendas before council for debate. On the item? Recorded.
Councillor Shiner, Councillor Perruzza, Councillor DiGiorgio, Councillor Wong Tam, Councillor Layton.
Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Burnside, Councillor Cole, please.
Councillor Shiner, please.
The item carries 42-1.
Thank you. That's it for the members' motions. So now we're doing the Toronto Hydro. That was a timed item. That was timed. So on page 4, EX 27.1, Toronto Hydro Annual General Meeting, and as well CC 32.11. We'll be dealing with those two items at the same time. (3211) is on page 10. Okay, questions to staff. Councillor Shiner.
Through you, Madam Speaker, I guess either to our chair or to the President and CEO, and thank you for coming today. The question I had asked at Executive Committee was in regards to the salary review, which I understand the board gave some instructions in the summer of last year. And it was supposed to come to the board, if I understand, is this correct, to the end of this year in December?
Councillor, perhaps I'll answer that question. Yes, we have retained an independent consultant to work with our
Sorry,
boards.
Madam Speaker, our guests are here and I really can't hear them without them shouting. Thank you, Mr. McFadden.
Yep. Well, Councillor, in response to the motion from last year, the board took the motion, referred it to our HR and Environment Committee. It in turn retained independent counsel from Mercer Company to look into this, to provide comparative information that would be useful in evaluating this. I should tell you that the committee received a preliminary report at its last meeting. We'll be getting the final report at the November committee meeting, and then it will go to our board in November and then be brought to council and to the city administration. So we'll be providing that report in November.
So when it came to comparative information, I think you know my next questions were, what were you comparing to? Was it municipal utilities such as Mississauga Hydro or York Hydro, or was it other so-considered energy companies?
It had to be comparables.
So what would the comparables be?
It would be companies like Enmax, Electra, which is the old Power Stream. Frankly, Councillor, I have not seen the report. I'm going to be getting a briefing in 2 weeks, so I'll have a chance to review it then. But I took your point. It will not be a comparable to, say, Exxon or some other large corporation. It will relate to reasonable comparables that would be generally recognized to be comparable.
Now, this was an issue that was raised, I think, some time ago at City Council and our request to the board, and other agencies have adjusted their salary bonuses, or lack of a better word for it, to fall within the 25% parameter. The question then is, why is Toronto Hydro taking so long?
Frankly, Councillor, I wasn't aware we were taking overly long, and I apologize if that's the impression being left. The committee has been dealing with it throughout this year. As you know, we have pre-existing employment arrangements with a number of our executives right across the board. And so in reviewing this, I mean, there's certain things we have to follow in terms of employment law. So we're trying to respect that. But obviously, we're going to want to ensure that whatever our employees are getting is fair and reasonable. We think that that's what the taxpayer and the consumer expects, is we're not overpaying, but we also expect to be paying capable executives at a fair and reasonable rate. And that's what we're trying to determine now.
Am I right, the annual revenue for Toronto Hydro this year is about $640 million, and the capital budget about $450 million?
The capital budget actually is $550 million.
Now, when you compare that, which a question has been raised, and I can understand the issue often goes back to the fact that you're a regulated company, but regulated is really regulated as to what profit you can return. So in other words, your capital program and your operating fees have to go in for review to allow or to put a cap on what you can do. Am I right?
Correct. We're very tightly regulated, but on all fronts.
That's the regulations. When we say regulated, as to what you can actually charge.
Correct, Councillor. You were on the board of Toronto Hydro, so you know as well as I do, yes.
I want to hear it because people say regulated and often say what. And then when you're comparing that, because the question's been raised, well, what about Toronto Water, which has a huge capital program and budget, which is similar? What about TTC? What about other city-owned agencies? And when you compare the salary levels of those compared to the salary levels at Hydro, how or why do you not put that comparison in place? Because they're all city agencies or boards or corporations.
That was your last question.
I don't actually know what those folks make, so I can't actually comment on what they're getting paid. I would say, though, that there is some significant differences, for example, between different types of agencies and different types of responsibilities they have, and different corporations. That's what our study is going to deal with, and Councillor, you can be assured you'll get the report, and we'd be very pleased when that's out to come and have a thorough discussion about the compensation arrangements and whether they're fair and reasonable in the circumstances. So that, you have my undertaking on that.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher, questions?
Yes, I'm just going to follow up a little bit on this. Who is doing your study, your comparator study?
Mercer. It's a well-known firm that does compensation around the world, and including Canada. They have a very large operation in Toronto, so they're the company that bid for the business and secured the business.
And you gave them parameters, of course.
We followed the parameters that Council had suggested.
But as far as the comparators and other types of industries, you would have given them some idea of what you were looking for, or would you not have?
Well, it would only be in the power industry. We wouldn't be taking industries right across Canada in different areas. We would be looking fundamentally at anything that was comparable. So that would be companies in the energy power sector.
Only in the energy power sector. And the, as you heard, the question as far as what the capital program is at Toronto Water, I'm wondering if the CFO can tell me that, what the capital program is at, or sorry, Mr. DiGeronimo is here.
Through you, Madam Speaker, the 10-year capital forecast for Toronto Water is $12.3 billion.
$12.3 billion. And I just ask Mr. DiGeronimo, and that is to refresh, keep the water on, keep the pumping, as far as a critical utility is concerned for the City of Toronto.
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes, that program encompasses state of good repair, legislated and regulated works, as well as service improvement. So it's all items in.
And there are regulations regarding water, of course, quite strictly regulated. Would you agree with me?
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes, there's Toronto Water subject to federal and provincial legislation and regulations.
And what about your operating? Toronto Hydro is $640 million. Is it comparable at Toronto Water?
Through you, Madam Speaker, Toronto Water's operating budget's about $440 million per annum.
So $440 million with and then yearly. Yeah, that's a 10 years. So we'd say it's $1.2 billion, your capital plan.
So the gross capital for 2017 is about $850 million. The spend rate of about $700 million.
Okay. And so we're looking at employee compensation, and I'm sorry, Speaker, if you could just stop my time. I don't think anybody introduced who is here with us today from the board, and they're standing behind me, which is hard for me, but I don't believe they were introduced.
Oh, okay. Should I ask them to stand and introduce themselves?
Probably, because they're not.
Well, I'm
city
David
staff.
McFadden. I'm chairman of the board, and the other folks here are members of our management team.
Okay, can they please introduce themselves?
Good afternoon, Council. Anthony Haynes, CEO. Good afternoon, Council. Sean Bollington, the CFO.
Thank you. That's fine. And so I guess I'll just ask you, Mr. McFadden, because really this is your annual report, so I'm understanding that really you're reporting to the shareholder. Do we agree on that?
Certainly do.
And that, would you agree that that's pretty comparable as far as just the city is concerned? Well, actually $850 million in capital and $450 million in operating. You're $550 million in capital and $640 in operating for Toronto Hydro. Those sound kind of comparative. Would you agree? As far as financially?
In terms of numbers, yes, but in terms of what's involved, they're quite different.
And you're well aware of what's involved at Toronto Water?
I'm aware of what's involved with Toronto Hydro, and I was involved some years ago with the restructuring of TDHC, and that involved quite a bit of interaction with water over the deep lake water cooling. So I did have some experience with the water system as well, and I should compliment Mr. DiGeronimo for running an excellent water system.
And is NMAX, do they deliver power? Are they a distribution company?
NMAX is strictly a distribution company. You may be thinking of EPCOR.
And where is that?
EPCOR is in Edmonton.
Yes, I know EBCOR's in Edmonton. So you're comparing yourself...
NMAX is in Calgary.
And you're comparing yourself to those city utilities?
Yes, I would think that would be comparable.
And then as far as just requirements, is your board very strict about kind of requirements for professional requirements for your CEO and others?
Yes, we have a pretty rigorous, a very rigorous hiring practice. We do push for ongoing upgrading of professional standards. I mean, Sean Bobbington, who's right behind you, Councillor, is our most recent hire. He can give you his credentials.
No, that's fine. You're aware that a number of years ago there was concerns regarding the university situation with your CEO. Were you on the board at that time?
That was your last question?
I have only been on the board for less than 2 years. I'm not aware of anything like that.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday, questions?
Thank you, Speaker. There's a lot of reporting in this package from Toronto Hydro. Does Toronto Hydro do other public reporting?
Well, Councillor, yes, we obviously report to the Securities Commission because we are a reporting issuer. In addition to that, we report the Ontario Energy Board in a lot of voluminous filings with them. We obviously report to the shareholder here, and then we have miscellaneous other agencies who have an interest in what we're doing from the Ontario Safety Authority on out. So yes, there's a lot of reports.
So what is a reporting issuer? What does that mean?
It means that we issue debt to the public, and we then have to report the same way as if we were a public company, in effect, in terms of our accounting standards and prudential requirements. So we would be the same as a bank or any other institution in terms of the rigor of the reporting.
So in terms of debt, would it be fair to say there's billions out there and that there are investment firms that are looking at Toronto Hydro with respect to where they park their money?
That's correct. And in fact, we have an A credit rating according with DBRS and with Standard & Poor's. Sean, what is the total amount of our outstanding in the market right now?
The total of our debt is $2.1 billion in debentures outstanding.
$2.1 billion. Now, would it be fair to say that a change in the credit rating could actually have a material financial effect on the company and also a material financial effect on the dividend that comes back to the city?
It certainly would, Councillor. It would increase our borrowing costs and obviously would have an effect on our dividend. But you might want to, Sean might be the best one, or Anthony, in terms of when we looked at the reduction in our rating, we did look at the cost of it, and maybe we could give you some further information on that.
So I'm okay with it, with the value, just taking comfort that it's significant. And where I want to clarify with this is that does Hydro have compensation policies, and are those policies, whether or not they're published or not, are they considered by investors and credit rating agencies when looking at the totality of the company and considering whether it's a worthy investment or not?
Absolutely. I mean, if you spend any time with DBRS, Standard & Poor's, or any other rating agencies, the competence of our executive team, our financial management is absolutely central, along with proper oversight from a board. But yes, I mean, that's obviously a very significant consideration when they're rating any company.
Would it be fair to say that compensation policies are designed in a way to properly attract and retain talent? And I'm going to add emphasis to retain because it would also be fair to say that in the electricity market right now, there's a lot of changes going on, and there's companies that are merging together and acquiring and moving people around.
That's correct. What's happening is the nature of the industry is changing tremendously. The old days of wires companies is gradually ending. It's becoming a lot more complicated. We need a different style of executive with broader experience than might have heretofore required. So yes, and we try to build into our compensation packages a definite incentive for our company to perform at a high level in a changing environment.
Given the interest of regulators and investors, does Toronto Hydro have compensation policies? And in your estimation, from what you observed on the board, would you say that they've generally been adhered to over a long period of time, so that there is ration to where the compensation levels are today?
Well, I've only been on 2 years, so I can't speak for what may have been around 10 or 20 years ago, but I can tell you from my experience in the couple of years I've been on the board that yes, the company follows state-of-the-art compensation reviews, and in terms of evaluating the job done and setting metrics up in advance is what's expected of members of the executive team.
Having competent and stable talent in place on an executive management team, would you, in your estimation, consider that one of the many risk factors that need to be managed in a corporation of this type? And in addition, not just you, but say somebody such as the OEB or an investor, or maybe even the city itself, when thinking about its asset?
Absolutely. I mean, if you have a company that has executives changing every few months, you've got a very serious problem. Number one, when an executive leaves, a capable executive, it leaves with a lot of money, because that person brings experience to the job, they bring know-how, they bring abilities to train and so on, that when they leave, there's gaps left. That costs us money. That certainly is something that bond rating services do look at. Because if you've got a slippery slope of people coming and going, that indicates typically a real problem within the company. Either the question of competence, morale, something's going wrong. So yeah, I mean, a stable executive team indicates a company that's doing better than not.
That was your last question. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Speaker. My question to the city manager. And it's, I guess, within the context of the questions that were asked by Councillor Holliday. Earlier, a councillor invited a comparison between the salaries of the head of the TTC, I guess the head of water, and hydro. And my questions of the city manager hopefully are simple, as would be the answers. Is the TTC and water expected to generate profits for the City of Toronto?
They have stewardship of extraordinarily significant assets, but they are not expected to return a rate of return to the city.
Do we expect dividends from the profits of hydro?
We do expect dividends from hydro and have an agreement to that effect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. McFadden, I know you've only been there for 2 years, but I know I've been on the hiring with Councillor Denzel-Minowa, Deputy Denzel-Wong, and Councillor Holland. What is the city's criteria for putting people on this board? Are we taking people from the sports industry, or do you know what the criteria is? What are we looking for?
Councillor, I don't know. I was hired.
So I'm going to ask our staff that. So that's probably a fair question.
Somebody else should answer that.
This is to the clerks. When we get all our resumes that come in, and we put them highly qualified. What are we looking for? Can anyone answer that from staff? No?
I'm on hold because I'm not sure who's going to answer that question. Oh, okay.
Through you, Madam Chair. In addition to the general eligibility criteria outlined in our public appointments policy, we are looking for a collection of experiences, such as experience on a public utility commission or board of a major corporation or other commercial enterprise, corporate finance, corporate governance, market development, large system operation and management, urban energy industries, public policy issues and laws relating to Toronto Hydro and the electricity market, environmental matters, labor relations, occupational health and safety issues, commercial sensitivity and acumen, independence of judgment and personal integrity, and financial management expertise.
We are looking for people in the energy and power sector, correct?
Yes.
Right, okay. So, Mr. McFadden, if we were going out to hire a new executive on Toronto Hydro, we'll be looking at somebody that just retired from MLSE, or we could be looking for somebody in the power and energy sector?
As hiring an executive member or member of the board, Councillor? Which one are you referring to?
Somebody on the board, so our staff, so our CEO, Vice President. Are we looking for somebody that knows nothing about the energy and power sector?
I would not expect you would hire somebody at the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm not taking anything away from people who play hockey or involved in sports, but I'm not sure that's necessarily a good qualification for somebody who runs something, an essential service like electricity.
Can you tell me, and that might be unfair to ask you, so maybe the CEO can ask, the last 5 years, 6 years ago, how many employees did Toronto Hydro have?
We have roughly 1,500.
1,500?
Yes.
How many are we down to today?
No, sorry, we have about 1,500
How many
today.
do we have?
We had about 3,000 employees when the
3,000, so
organization was
we've
put together.
cut the workforce in half, and all those efficiencies, where are those savings coming from?
Yeah, those were across the board, right through our entire operations. I should also say it's not just a question of reducing the heads, the head count, but also our work, the amount of work that we do on an average day has increased by about 10 times. So about half the number of employees are delivering about 10 times the units of work that they did 10 years ago.
I'm sorry, Councillor Prutz, I couldn't hear that. Could you repeat that, Mr. Haynes? I couldn't hear what you said, that last couple sentences.
Yeah, when we talk about efficiency, it's not simply the question of cutting costs. Of course, it's the units of work that you get for the value of your labor force. And in Toronto Hydro's case, we have increased the units of work by about 10-fold, while we've reduced the head count by about half.
Great, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Councillor DiCiano.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. Given that we're talking about audited financial statements, I'm going to try and stay on topic closer to Councillor Kelly's comments, because I think we're making wrong comparisons here. So, as a corporation, can you tell me your net income over the last 5 years? Has it gone up or down?
Through you, Madam Chair. Our net income has gone up by about 15% per year. I think last year it was up about $25 million, or about 20%. So our average cumulative growth rate, say over the last 10 years, is about 15%, which is quite a bit ahead of market of comparable utilities.
And that money comes straight to us, the City of Toronto, is that correct?
Yeah, as Mr. Wallace said earlier, there is a dividend policy. Currently, 60% of those earnings come to the city in the form of a dividend in the year following.
Okay, that's fantastic. Absenteeism, is it up or down over the last 5 years?
It's certainly something that we've worked hard on. Absenteeism last year was just over 3 days per employee. Two-thirds of our employees didn't miss a single day, and that's certainly something we're deeply proud of. That is both inside workers, outside workers, management team, and unionized employees. For me, I look at that as really a barometer of the engagement and the morale of the employees at Toronto Hydro. Not only are they well and coming to work, but they're also engaged and they understand the important role that they play in serving our customers.
So absenteeism continues to go down?
That's right. It's, as I said, it's at 3 days. I don't know where you go from there, with two-thirds of the employees simply not missing a single day, but we continue to drive continuous improvement as a cultural challenge at Toronto Hydro.
Okay. Service interruptions due to, the fact that the city and every corporation agency has aging infrastructure. I remember the big blackout. Since then, we haven't had a repeat. Can you tell me how service interruptions due to aging equipment is?
We have it's certainly one of our biggest challenges. About 1/3 of our assets are past their life. In other words, could fail imminently. That's been our biggest challenge. It takes about $1 billion to change 1%. So in other words, we certainly have tens of billions of dollars of renewal ahead of us. I am happy to say, though, as we've been investing this $500 million or so this year, our reliability continues to get better each and every year. In fact, this year we're running at the best record we've ever had, followed by last year, which was the best record we had, until then. So each and every year, the performance of the asset has been getting better. And the other statistic that I look at is when there is a problem, how fast are we able to restore power? So the duration of the outages, and those have been getting shorter and shorter. So for the same type of outage, we've in fact been getting more efficient at sending the right resources to the right place with the right equipment to get the lights on faster. So those are the two primary operational statistics that we look at.
Okay, and most importantly, customer satisfaction. What trend are you on? I know that there's been much talk with respect to certainly our provincial producer. Can you tell me how your customer satisfaction is going on behalf of your customers?
At the end of the day, I
residents?
see us as being a customer satisfaction or a customer service organization. And while not wanting to boast, I am terribly proud of the team in that just last week we were in fact awarded by one of the associations in Ontario the best customer service organization of all electric and gas companies in this province. And so that certainly is a testament to Chris Terrell and his team in the way that we engage with our customers and try to modernize the services that we offer our customers. And so customer satisfaction, we tend to be well ahead of the marketplace, but certainly there are always those moments when we think we can do better.
So, regulated or not, you're still dealing in a world of realities with employees, customer service, net income that you got to produce for a shareholder. You're dealing with that on a daily basis, regulated or not.
Yeah, the process of being regulated, I think there's often confusion about it. It doesn't guarantee us a return. It simply allows the rates to be set such that a return is possible. You then have to go out there and operate in accordance with your plans and achieve the productivity gains that you committed to. In fact, our regulatory regime is called incentive regulation. So what happens is the regulator sets out what you will achieve in terms of improvements for the year, takes it out of you on day one, in other words, January 1st, and you have to run like crazy to achieve the targeted returns on equity. And I will say, though, that over the last 12 or 15 years, I think we missed our return on equity once. So in fact, most years we actually perform higher than our allowed returns, those amounts that would be set in our rates.
Okay, that was your last
That's good enough for me. Thank you.
That was your last question. Councillor Burnside.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to follow. Actually, I want some clarification on Councillor DeChannel's piercing questions. We're talking about productivity here, and you said something about a tenfold increase. Sorry, could you just elaborate on that?
Yeah. Perhaps at the simplest way we could look at it is when we had the 3,000 employees, we were delivering about $40 million worth of capital in that year. In other words, if you took the relationship between the number of people and the amount of capital we were able to perform with those people, you get a number. If you looked at it today, with the workforce that we have today doing the capital program that workforce delivers, you will see this increase in the amount of work that's been achieved by a crew on an average day. Those things are achieved through a whole myriad of productivity improvements. GPSs in trucks, better information about where they're going, what they're going to be doing on the day, materials that get delivered to job site, before the crew does. Those sorts of things have allowed those productivity gains to happen.
And that's inflation adjusted, and you're not using numbers from 10 years ago.
I am using numbers, so I have not inflated the $40 million to today's dollars. Those were dollars 10 years ago and dollars today.
So it's not really tenfold?
Okay. But the bodies, I'm not inflating either, I guess.
Okay, and then I guess the most important question, because I don't know where you started, so it's hard to make a comparison to where you are. I'd look at an industry comparison would probably be a little more valuable. How can you comment on that?
I'm sorry, on which statistic?
On productivity. Because you're talking about capital projects, right?
Yeah, I mean, productivity comes in all kinds of forms. Our call center performance is in the top 10% of our industry, as just one example of productivity. We have both contracted out resources on the capital side and our own internal resources, and so we do comparators against those. What I can tell you is the Ontario Energy Board looks at these things rigorously. We do comparator studies. The last study we did, the best comparables are in fact in the United States, 4 utilities in the United States where we fared extremely well across the board of processes that we have in the company against comparator utilities.
So just for clarification, because I don't really understand your industry, what does fared extremely well actually mean?
Well,
because you used a 10% ranking,
Yeah.
and now you're saying extremely well. It's a bit nebulous.
So
for
if you
me.
can imagine the day-to-day operations of the company have a series of processes within them. You know, the meter to cash is a process. So in that case, we were in the top percentile.
Okay.
That's the 10%. In others, we may be average. For example, our outages are about average to those 4 utilities. And so there is a range, but they look at it across a myriad of indices. And from that, I come to the conclusion that there are none that we are out of market. We're either average or better than average.
And I think you're referring, and this is my last question, so thank you. In terms of delivering of capital projects, your productivity increased tenfold. In the delivery of actual capital projects, what would your ranking be? Or do they even rank? I don't know.
I'm not sure I've got those. I'm just looking around. Ben, do you have that statistic? The productivity gains on the capital side?
Comparison.
Yeah. Well,
Sorry, I want a comparison. I'm trying to understand where Toronto Hydro is to other utilities.
Yeah.
So the fact is, if you were extremely unproductive 20 years ago, the fact that you're getting better 0.6 every year really doesn't mean a lot to me.
Yeah. So we're about average on the capital side.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holland, questions?
Through you, and this is regarding just the Toronto Board. And I have a first question to staff if they're around. So we, as chair of the corporation's nominating panel, we've done a lot of work on skills matrix and setting the table so that we meet the criteria that we should be meeting in terms of skill set. And so I'm just wondering if we have met that and what the, I guess we're looking at 2019, so we're going to reappoint that board. And looking forward, is there anything that you could identify that we're missing?
Through you, Madam Chair. That would be a conversation I think we would have with the City Manager's office to take a look at what skill sets we currently have and then assess what might be necessary as we move into the next phase of Toronto Hydro's strategic direction.
Okay, and so, but we have, I know that we have increased the number of women and diversity on that panel, on the board, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great. And in terms of, I'll ask Mr. McFadden, in terms of, you and I have had a conversation about this. So in terms of innovation and technology, we know that a lot of boards are not even necessarily looking at energy per se, or let's say within their specific industry, but there is a cross-sectional when it comes to boards. And who would you say on your board have that expertise?
Well, oddly enough, it may be me, in part, because I'm the former chair of the Ontario Centres of Excellence involved with York University, so I guess I would be partly. I think a couple of the other members of the board have a background in that. You know, the issue, and Councillor, you've raised a very important issue. You only have so many positions to fill, and you don't necessarily have the qualifications that cover every single criteria. Maybe one thing I would comment on, and maybe it's relevant to this point, I would say this, that the board, as a group, works very hard. They're very diligent in what they do. I mean, the members of council who are on the board can probably attest to that directly here on the floor. But as chairman of the board, I'm very impressed. We have virtually 100% attendance at meetings. Management will confirm this. They're not shrinking violets. We ask very tough questions during the course of the meetings. The board is very engaged in the strategic direction of the company. They're not waiting for management to come up with an idea and just sit there and wait. They're not. Now, I'm not saying it's disruptive, but we've got to, it has worked, I think, quite well. But, of course, the board members that we have only been on for, well, basically, nobody has been on longer than 10 years but one person of the citizen members. So I think you've got a hard-working board. They to date, at least, seem to be able to cover all of the concerns that we have to address. Your question is valid. If we had somebody outstanding technology, I'd love to have them too. I'm not saying your ideas or that idea is wrong in any way, but I think in terms of performance, I think this board works very hard on all aspects, including the innovation aspect, which I think is misunderstood and underemphasized in terms of understanding what's going on in the energy industry. We have to modernize, we have to change, or in 20 years' time, you may find the dividends disappearing.
Right, okay. So you're comfortable with moving forward on the on all of the board appointments, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Great.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. I think I have one more set of questions. Councillor Campbell?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question for Mr. Rossini. Last year, when we went through the budget process, there was a concern about a cut in the dividend from Toronto Hydro. Can you just refresh Council's memory as to what that was all about and what the outcome was?
Yes, so through you, Madam Chair, the Toronto Hydro was facing an issue where their debt-to-capital ratio, meaning there were too much debt, not enough equity, and the fear is if they stayed at that level, the OEB would now let them, in their rates, factor in the higher level. We didn't want that to happen because that would eventually lower our net income, lower their rate of return. So we injected some capital into the business by giving them $250 million. So we made an equity investment with our investment funds into the business. In return for that, we said, you know, if you were to have gone out to the market and sold $250 million or 10% of equity, a private sector partner would have expected a higher dividend in return for that. So the quid pro quo in our arrangements and the deal that we came up and the compromise that we came up with Toronto Hydro was we will inject $250 million into the business, bring their debt to equity back to 60-40, and in return we raise the dividend from 50%, the dividend rate, to 60% of net income.
So in terms of dollars, the dividend last year was how much from Toronto Hydro?
We had $67 million in the budget, and I believe the actuals were $63 million.
And the forecast for 2018?
It's about $15 million higher because of this move that we did.
It's going to about $15 million higher.
15.
Okay. 15, right, okay. So next question is for the Hydro team. What is the state of your state of good repair backlog? What is the state of good repair backlog?
Through you, Madam Chair. As I mentioned earlier, we've got about 30% of our assets are past life. We think the state of good repair is about to have about 15% past life. In other words, you don't have to fix all of it. So we have a backlog of about $15 billion, give or take.
So I guess what has been the trend over the last 2 to 3 years, and what's the expected trend over the next 2 to 3 years? Is this backlog accelerating? Is it getting worse, or are you making inroads?
We're making very slow inroads, all subject to regulatory approval, of course. And so the real balancing act is to find the right pace of repair against the right rate impact. And so we are, of course, all very conscious of the rate impacts that our customers have been feeling, and so it's really finding the right balance. So while we would like to do more and have the capacity to do more, we've decided to move at the pace that we have in order to find the right balance between rate and state of good repair.
So would state of good repair, would the extent to which you have a large outstanding state of good repair, that would also affect product, the product that you put out there, and the quality of the product that you put out there. Because I know that in my ward, I would say customer satisfaction is average. I wouldn't say it's good, and I wouldn't say it's bad. I would say customer satisfaction is average. So, is it safe to assume that your troubles with the state of good repair backlog are also reflective of customer satisfaction?
Councillor, as I did say, of course, the state of good repair has a great deal of tie with the reliability of our grid, but it certainly isn't the only indication of something, why the power went out. You can have a storm event and other things. And so it is one of the reasons that we have the power go out is the state of good repair. And as I mentioned earlier, we in fact get better at that statistic each and every year. In other words, the lights go out less often, and the repair time, in other words, the time to get the power back on, gets shorter. And so those are good indications that we're spending the money in the right places while we continue to invest below what the engineers tell us that we should be investing at.
And the last question is, what is your capital spend completion rate?
I wonder if you can help me with that.
So, well, let's say I don't know how much you budget every year for capital expenditures, but what's
this year we will, last year, say a bit better number because we're here for 16, we invested about $550 million. Our regulatory, we asked for multi-year application approvals in front of the Ontario Energy Board. 5 years was our last rate-setting period. That was for the 15 to 19 period where we got about $2.3 billion of capital approved.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's it for the questions. Speakers. Councillor Shiner, you held the item down. Is it on? Is your mic on?
Now it is.
Okay, go ahead.
Madam Speaker, first of all, I served on the Toronto Hydro Board and I have the utmost respect for, I have no motions, for the members of the board, both the citizens and the public members and our members of council, and for the staff at Toronto Hydro. My questions earlier are one of comparisons. TTC, $14 billion worth of assets, $1.7 billion operating budget, $1.7 billion capital budget. They run a rail service, regulated service, lots of issues that they have to deal with as far as what they have to meet in their standards. Toronto Water, $28 billion in assets, over a $1 billion capital and operating budget. Our new realty agency is going to have $27 billion in assets and $2.1 billion in operating expenses. Toronto Hydro, $1.19 billion in operating capital budgets. Well within or below what the other agencies have and responsibilities. Yet the salaries of the Chief General Manager, CEO of the TTC, $350,000, Toronto Water, in the range of $250,000. The current realty agency, a little over $350,000, and I expect the new one may be slightly more. So then I go ahead and look at what's really happening and where we're at. And the salaries, which used to be, when I served on the board, in the neighborhood of $400,000 a year for a decade, or comparable to that, because you can look, can I get the overhead on? So I did a salary comparison, and you can see the salaries, if you want, in 2005, and the bonus came out to 23% bonus, and a reasonable salary level for the job that was done. Well, that continued until we started to hit 2010. Where all of a sudden the bonuses were going up to 91%, 88%, 2012, I'll bring your attention to it, 95%, and go up to the present now, 97%, $1 million plus salaries, average bonus 62%. $1 million salaries. That's the issue that was raised in the bonuses by Councillor Menon Wong when he thought that all of the agencies should have no more than a 25% maximum bonus, so salary should be comparable to it, which is why I asked the question. 2012, why do I cite that? Because that's the year when the OMB blew us out of the water. Wouldn't give us the rate increase that we wanted to and said we weren't acting well. And in fact, 2013, 2014, 2015, we have efficiency rating of 5. That's the lowest, where it says actual costs are 25% or more above predicted costs. I only have information that's online and available. So while we used to have a comparable salary for our executives, now the bonuses and the salaries are substantially more, and the corporation really isn't performing that well. And as the question was asked, we had to have a $250 million cash injection. And we had a problem with the lighting company, the street lighting, where we also had to shore that up, because the deal that was there was we sold it to Toronto Hydro at a reasonable price with a fixed rate, and we couldn't get that. So I want to see an efficient company, and I think there should be fairness for the salaries for everyone that works there. But I also have the question of the people that are trying to pay hydro rates. This is a big portion of it. People are having trouble paying their hydro bills, so much that the provincial government has noticed it and actually deferred their debt to drop down the rates. We're not doing that. We're not meeting our objectives. We're not meeting our efficiencies, and yet with all that, we're giving bonuses averaging over 60% and up to 97%. There's something seriously wrong here that the board has to address. And many of these people that are there getting those salaries are the ones that were getting the much lower salaries years ago. So in all due respect, it wasn't a bad salary before, and it wouldn't be bad to keep it in line with that there. And I know that Councillor Menon Wong, when it was a committee, he was the one that was pushing the 25%. I was actually shocked when now he was defending a higher bonus level, and he actually pointed a finger at Toronto Parking Authority and Bill Toronto, saying that Toronto Hydro isn't the only one late reporting. Bill Toronto and Parking Authority is. Yet he served on Bill Toronto, and ever since the new president and CEO was there, which I didn't appoint, I wasn't on the board, they've always been on time. So I don't think you should disrespect other companies that way, which is what has happened. So I'm just asking what's fair and reasonable that people should have and should expect from their hydro company and its board. And I'm just asking that when you review the salaries, you review it in the context of what the citizens of Toronto would like to see, what it costs them for this dear service, what they can afford, and come back with something that's fair and reasonable for us to have. And I really would appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, are there any further speakers? No? Okay, on item EX 27.1. On the item, on favor, carried, recorded. Mr. Mayor, did you want to speak? Pardon? Sorry, the mayor wanted to speak.
All in favor?
No? No? Okay, Mayor Tory.
I'm sorry, I was waiting for the piece of paper and I didn't realize there was no speakers list. I just wanted to say that in response to the comments made by Councillor Shiner, that what I was getting was a copy of our resolution that really led to the chain of events that Mr. McFadden referred to, where we sent a message, and I think it was within the last year or so, since this council has been here, asking them, or I'm not sure whether, that's why I wanted the wording, whether it's asked or directed, that the bonus policy that's in place be consistent with the bonus policy applied elsewhere. And that is precisely the report that Mr. McFadden said is coming back. And one could argue about whether it's taken too long for it to come. But I certainly do understand when you're running a board, as they're over there, in a way that is consistent with corporate governance practice elsewhere in the country for corporations of that size, you would go out and hire a consultant and do what they've done to get the comparables. And I heard Mr. McFadden answering, and I thought that his answers suggested, in response to questions being asked over here somewhere, I forget who was asking, that maybe it was you, Councillor Shiner, that the comparables were other municipal electric companies and not Exxon and not that sort of thing. So I guess I'm just optimistic. It was a very interesting talk you gave, but I guess I'm optimistic that what we're going to get back by way of a report we're expecting to receive over here after the board has seen it is something that is responsive to what we said. And so while that's a valid concern today, I hope it won't be as valid a concern tomorrow, although Mr. McFadden did point out that there are matters of employment law and sometimes contracts that are entered into that have to be taken into account when you're looking at this kind of thing. So I didn't want the impression to be left with the citizens out there. Thank you. So here's our resolution, which was from July 12th and 13th and 14th of 2016. And it says that Council, acting as shareholder, require the Board of Hydro to review its senior executive compensation policy and forward it to the Executive Committee to City Council in 2017, a comparator analysis for each position. And it says where variable incentive pay is established, it shall not exceed 25% of base salary inclusive of merit pay. So I think the citizens watching might have had the impression we've kind of been sitting around here, or they have over there at Hydro, kind of just letting the good times roll, when in fact the city council itself passed a resolution. It went to Hydro. They're doing what I would consider to be proper in the circumstances, a little bit long in the period of time, I'll say, but they're going to have a report back here in 2017, which is what the resolution said, that speaks to the matter of the size of those bonuses that you talked about, that the councillor talked about, Madam Speaker. And so I just wanted to really make sure we registered that in fact, I think action has been taken. There is now a response coming back, and that I hope that will be something that will be responsive to Councillor Shiner's comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So on the item recorded vote.
Members, we cancel the previous votes. Your lights might be lit up, so please make sure you've pressed your button. Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Wong-Tam. Councillor Kelly, please.
Councillor Grimes, please.
Councillor Wong-Tam and Councillor Kelly, please. Councillor Kelly, your vote, please.
The item is adopted 38-1.
Okay, now on page 10, CC 3211, appointments to Toronto Hydro Board of Directors. Councillor Fletcher, you held the item down, so you like to move? Yeah, I know. We have to move it. So you're going to move it? Oh, we don't have to move it? Oh, okay. Okay, recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor DiGiorgio, Councillor Carmichael-Greb, Councillor Shiner.
Councillor Campbell, please.
The item carries 35-4.
Okay? That's it. But don't we go back to what we, don't we go? Yes, Councillor Carroll? Can I have some quiet, please? Okay, Councillor Carroll, you had questions.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, hold on. Okay.
Just so I don't have to shout the questions. I like having a microphone. Yes, Madam Speaker, going back to the item from this morning, I understand that the framework was described to the questioners this morning. We get the framework. I'm struggling with some of the context that we've had in the past when we didn't have a framework. And I think some of the questioners tried to get at it. But I'm trying to decide now, how would I deal with this in the future? So the question is this: we're only moving motions if something has already been federally recognized, has a parliamentary recognition of some sort. But what would we do in the future in situations like the ones in the past described? The Armenian genocide is the best example. It has taken many, many years. It in fact still has not been recognized in Turkey. But many governments came to recognize it through communities organizing and asking other bodies to acknowledge, until finally nations began to acknowledge. So if we're in that same situation going forward under this framework, communities are organizing and they're coming to other bodies such as our own, what steps could we take with our communities?
Through the Speaker, Councillor, there are various ways that we can be commemorating any of these activities. It could be through any existing programs. It could be through the monument policy. It could be a proclamation. It could be a flag raising. It could be an event on the square, those kinds of things. So there's various activities or events that actually, or programs that already exist. So if it is recognized by the federal government or through the parliamentary government of Canada, it would be the first sort of view of it, and then it would have to apply for whatever program they would like to have the recognition.
I think you may, either I misunderstood the answer, Madam Speaker, or you misunderstood my question. You're saying I can do all those things, including a proclamation of something that has been recognized by the federal government. What I'm asking is, what if the situation is an event in history or an event in recent times is not being acknowledged by federal governments, and the community's response to that is to organize and come to other bodies, such as municipal, such as province. The Armenian genocide being the example in the past, it took many governments of many orders making proclamation, recognizing, and finally nations began to acknowledge and recognize. If we find ourselves in that situation with other atrocities, and the federal governments are refusing to acknowledge, what is our ability in working with our communities? What are we allowed to do if we're stuck waiting for nations to recognize, waiting for Canada or any other nation to recognize, but our community is coming to us and saying, we need to raise awareness, we need to organize because we need to get the federal government to recognize something. What will I be allowed to do under the framework? That's what I need to know.
Okay, through the Speaker, we're proposing that we as a city, or the council would only recognize those that are recognized by the federal government or through the parliamentary area. It would be up to council to decide whether they want to agree with this recommendation or not.
So to be clear, and I only have 1 minute left, so then going forward, until the nation recognizes it, I can organize as an individual councillor, and 30 of us could decide to do the same, but as a council we can't make the proclamation until the nation does. Am I getting it right?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. That clarifies it for me, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday, questions?
Thank you, Speaker. I guess in my 3 years here at Council, I'm always amazed at how we spend the people's time, and I'll just use that as to describe Council's time, which comes at a cost to debate issues that are part of another government or a matter before the federal government or the provincial government. I guess my question to the clerk is, do you have any advice for us on how to remain efficient? Are there any actions that this council can take to keep the agenda nice and tight and to focus on the matters at hand that we are ultimately tasked to deal with and effectively dispose of items that come to the floor that might have to do with other governments?
That, Councillor, is the intent of the report before us.
Understood, and I would slot this particular item on genocides and massacres as an example of maybe a broader category of items that do come to the council floor. So this report, I think, helps us on that particular subject. Is there anything else that we as a council could be doing? We just debated a minimum wage in Ontario, something that has been dealt with the Ontario legislature. Do you have any advice to us about remaining efficient with those type of discussions that come to the council floor?
Madam Speaker, I'm not sure how I can answer that question in the context of the report that's on the floor of council.
Right. Fair enough. I'm okay with that, Speaker. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Karygiannis, I'm sorry, but that comment you just made, I think you should apologize. No, but you should not be criticizing staff or commenting like that with staff. I'm sorry, but please be respectful. Yes.
Madam Chair, this was not intended to the staff, but the staff says that they don't know how to answer. So in that view, if I offended them, I am sorry. But in that view, I said they don't have an answer.
You offended members of council on that comment.
Well, that's your, that is, thank you, Madam Chair. But I'm sure that
I just give up.
On a point of personal privilege,
Councillor
as your
Carroll.
alternate, I respectfully ask that you require my fellow councillor to apologize for what he just said about you. And I don't care if it was on the microphone or not.
you want to do that, let's have it out.
Yes,
Turn on the
let's.
mic.
Apologize.
The chair's job is to direct traffic. The chair's job is not to make comments. And the chair should not be making comments about individual councillors about if they're here or they're not here. That is not the job of the chair.
Madam
now,
Speaker.
If I said something that
Councillor Karygiannis, Councillor Carroll is asking for an apology to me. So would you?
Madam Chair, I will apologize to you and to her, but however, in the same vein.
No, Madam Speaker, if I can clarify my point of personal privilege, it is my understanding that a speaker in this House of Government or any other order of government, it is also your job to maintain decorum and respect in the chamber for members of staff, for members of council, and for all of us. That is the role of a speaker in any House of Government. That's why we chose to have a speaker. We're one of the few council chambers in North America that has a speaker, and it is your job to do what you have just done. I thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
It's not her job to make comments about
Okay, Deputy Mayor Min Wong.
No, it is.
I just have a couple of questions. So, I would assume that the clerk's office would be, if this doesn't pass, we would be asking your advice in terms of whether to recognize events like massacres and genocides. Yes, that would be fall in your. In the absence of this policy, it would fall to the clerk's office to give us advice?
Through the Speaker, yes, that is correct.
So I'm just wondering, is the clerk's office equipped to do that? Do you have the resources? Well, what's involved? I mean, the research involved in this.
For each individual request, there is considerable research that is required.
And do you have the manpower and resources to conduct those investigations?
No, we don't have the resources or the kind of skill set for that.
So, for example, there was just a recognition of Pontian Massacre. If we were asked for your advice on whether that should be recognized or not, that would involve a significant bit of work on your part, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I see. And just a final question. So this report, you're late in giving us this report, is that correct? You were supposed to deliver it to the executive committee a little earlier than it was delivered.
Correct. We were trying to get it earlier this year, yes.
And that was because you had a lot of work to do and you were looking at all sorts of best practices.
Correct.
And where else did you look?
We went to the federal government, we went to the provincial government, we went to municipalities across Canada.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, speakers. Councillor Shan.
Let council on a case-by-case basis decide.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just find this first part of the motion very problematic for various reasons. Sorry, I have a motion to delete the first part of the motion and first part of the recommendation and replace it with what's up there. The reason is that we all know that Toronto City, we pride ourselves saying that our city has the world living with us. That is not true for any other cities as much as ours. And if we have the world living with us, anything that happens across the world is going to impact us. Not because we hear it through news, but because there are people who live in this city who are directly impacted. Their relatives are directly impacted. As we speak, we have Rohingya Muslims who are impacted, but their relatives here in Toronto are impacted. And sometimes people from countries that have poverty as the major cause, or people from racialized communities, their voices do not get heard. I don't think the mayor needed permission or any form of motion to come here in the starting of the day to do a moment of silence for the people who died in US, because that's taken as something that we do naturally. But when we want to grieve, when we want to talk about something that is happening in another part of the world where the relatives are here, but they're from racialized communities, from immigrant communities, always like, do we need to discuss this in this city council? Everybody has a role to play, especially a city like Toronto that prides itself saying that we have the world living here. We have a responsibility. This looks like we are just washing our hands of a responsibility, wanting to stay silent when things happen. And that's what happened to Tamils. When Tamils were protesting on the street, we couldn't have anything happen here at City Council because people thought it was not their issue, when tens of thousands of Tamil Canadians were grieving right here. Within those 5 days, we had tens of thousands of people die. The UN only recognized that after 3 years, but Toronto should have recognized it because people in Toronto were grieving it right here, right then. So it's important for us to be responsive to the people who live in our city. And it's important for us to recognize a motion like this restricts ourselves. I asked a question asking if staff are wanting to, if a staff in a library want to commemorate a genocide or a massacre that happened and it's not federally recognized, then can they do it? I hear it was not permitted. It is going to tie our public service to be responsive to communities that are looking for support. Our role is not just about making policies about trees and cars and other things. It's about people as well. When people need support, people need emotional support, it is a city that prides itself as compassionate thing. So I think the indigenous communities was talked about. I don't think the federal government has formally recognized the genocide, the cultural genocide, the targeted genocide that happened. So if we wait for the federal government to do it, it is going to be a bad move for us because we do everything else. We do on workers' rights, we do on other issues that we talk about advocating at the other levels. We pass motion after motion saying, let's ask the federal government to do this, let's ask this provincial government to do it. Why can't we have a motion here that asks, let's ask the federal government to examine if a genocide was happening? Why is it wrong for us to do it when we have a significant population of that particular community impacted living here? And it's very important for us to take into consideration this has to do with people of color being feared. People of color, racialized communities being feared and being uncomfortable about talking about issues that impact them. And it's very, very important for us to take this into consideration as we move forward. So I'm requesting that people either, there would be a motion probably later about deleting entirely the first part of it. If the first part of it needs to either be deleted or be amended in a way that allows the City of Toronto to have its own fingerprint on this issue, because It is not about getting involved in foreign policy issue. It's about supporting the people who live in our city, the diverse people who live in our city. If you want to meaningfully support them, we need to hear them out. It's on our streets, in our city of Toronto street, that citizens of Toronto from racialized communities for different backgrounds are protesting. It's on our street that these things are happening. So it's important for us to make sure that our neighbors are taken care of, that we don't just give a cold shoulder and a silence as the treatment as we have been doing in many, many situations. So I asked everyone, and I also want to tell folks who rely on UN to check the track record of UN in terms of how they respond to genocide and massacres. It's always been political, it's always been delayed, and federally as well, it's political as well. Federally, the proclamations are not all scientifically monitored. It's by political will that federal government passes resolutions on genocide and massacre. So it is a leadership issue that we as a city council have to stay on it. If this passes, this will have a phenomenal amount of negative impact on people of color, racialized communities, immigrants, and I ask my colleagues to take this seriously and not take this lightly. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we do have some questions for you. Councillor Holliday, 3 minutes, clarification of the motion.
Thank you, Speaker. Through you to Councillor Shan, to help me understand the intent of the motion. Is it the intent to have support services, probably through the clerks, to prepare reports and help councillors get equipped to make these types of decisions, given the complexity of world issues?
It is asking us, I understand these are complex issues, and it's asking us to have a guidelines for us so that guidance can be provided to councillors when they bring such motion, what to consider and what not to consider, and what guidelines to be used.
Guidelines, yes. So that would infer that staff resources have to be spent to prepare and understand and research these issues so that council can understand it. The alternative being councillors have got to go out onto Wikipedia or the internet or to the encyclopedia in the library and figure it all out, figure out world history each time something comes up. So the intent is to really authorize staff to go out and prepare and research so that they can serve us some information to help us make an informed decision when the matters come up.
I think the intent is basically simple. When I asked about a question, I'll give you an example. When I asked about a question about whether a group of staff at a public library commemorating a massacre that's not recognized federally, would that be permitted or not, I was told it would not be permitted. And I understand this motion doesn't say those things explicitly, but this motion has such an impact on frontline that is not fully disclosed in here. So that's why I'm asking for guidelines. If you want to do something that's going to impact at certain levels in our boards, agencies, and in our frontline work, we need to be clear about what the impact is and have guidelines for it.
So with the deepest respect, Madam Chair, I understand the report before us is really centered around council and council procedures. To be clear, the intent that you just spoke about is about human resources, is about governing what staff may or may not do, may take a political position, may not take a political position in actions, and the example was having a demonstration or an event at a library. Is that correct? Have I understood that it's about a human resource policy?
So if you read the first part of the motion, it says, direct upon receipt of a request, city programs and services provide. So it's not talking about council. It says city programs and services provide only of violent world incidents. So it's not about council. It's about city services and programs only support those that are recognized.
Okay, so it would be the appropriation of resources then towards doing commemorative recognition. So we're authorizing city staff to use time and energy into doing this. Is that correct?
If the staff wish to do it as part of their responsiveness of their service, they should be permitted to do it.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burnside, 3 minutes, clarification.
Thank you. So you presented an analogy with the victims in Las Vegas and how the mayor and council recognized those victims, correct? Okay. And then you spoke of genocide. Maybe I'm misunderstanding genocide, but I want to understand how you perceive it. Is when someone says there's a genocide, is that also not a commentary on a situation?
Well, I think the reason I raised that is that when we do commemoration or a moment of silence, for example, for a massacre, which is also loosely defined, we should have the flexibility as a council to be able to do that depending on the will of the council, not necessarily be restricted by the federal definition. So, for example, as we had the agency, the mayor, as the mayor of the biggest city in Canada, is able to get up and say, you know, we are going to have a moment of silence, and the council agrees with it because that's the culture of our organization to do that. We should have the ability for
right, so sorry, I
councillors
don't
to
want to cut you off too much, but I guess what I'm trying to get to is if it's one thing to recognize 59 people dead, or 59,000 people dead, it's another thing to make a commentary on that. Do you see any...
Yeah, there's clearly a difference, but what I'm saying is that if there is a will of the... So there's a couple of things that can happen. The city council, I as a councillor can bring a motion to say, City of Toronto Council urged the federal government to examine if a genocide is happening in this country.
Councillor
And,
Burnside, the
should be
motion
permitted.
is in front of you. Can you just, for clarification only, on the motion? It's right in front of you. It's the green one.
Well, yeah, because it's about genocides, and I'm trying to understand the commentary on genocides, and the analogy was made about victims of violence. So that's what I'm trying to clarify. Pardon me?
Your intent of the motion is to have...
Same? Okay. And then my last question, for councillors that may not have knowledge of a certain situation, do you see it as problematic asking them to make a decision with 1 or 2 days' notice?
Well, absolutely. That's why I'm asking for guidelines. I mean, if councillors are not informed of a particular situation that is impacting Toronto, the reason something would come to Toronto Council, I'm assuming it's because it impacts the people who live in the City of Toronto.
Right,
It may be a world event, but it is also impacting people of Toronto. So it's important for the city councillors. If I'm talking about, say, what's happening to Rohingya Muslims or Tamils, there are people who are related to that particular community who live in this city. So it's important for us to become aware, and we use that as an opportunity to become aware.
But how do you see us educating ourselves in 24 hours?
Okay, that was your last question.
Well, I think the time factor is, again, your choice. You know, whether you can educate yourself in 24 hours, you can educate yourself over a 2 month period, or you can abstain from a vote, you can not vote for a situation because you don't know much about it. It's up to the councillors, but that shouldn't determine a councillor who knows a lot about the issue from bringing it to the table. A councillor's lack of information should not limit a councillor's ability to present a situation to be brought to the table.
Thank you. Councillor Karagianis, clarification?
Yeah, Madam Chair. I was wondering if you can expand to develop and made in Toronto guidelines. This would be something that we will develop here, or is this something that they would follow the federal or provincial guidelines?
Well, it's up to so what I saw read just now on the motion is that we only said we will follow the events that are recognized by the federal government. We didn't say we will follow the federal guidelines, which means the federal government might change the policy tomorrow, and we will be tied to that. What I'm asking for is the Made in Toronto policy, which means Toronto City Council approves a policy through which we decide, which could include consulting with the federal government, which could include having consultation with other respected organizations, but it has to be something more tangible and more comprehensive than to say, we'll only do what the federal government has acknowledged.
Would you be willing to, would this also include something, consulting with the communities? For example, what happened in Sri Lanka from 1984 to 2009 was nothing less than a genocide. However, that has not been recognized by the federal government, but we can certainly recognize it here, as municipalities have done. Would that, can we reach into the communities and also consult with them on such an issue? Would that be part of Made in Toronto?
Well, I think it's up to the staff to go back and develop the guidelines. I'm hoping, as the City of Toronto, policies have always been consultative. Made in Toronto guidelines will include a community consultation, but I'm not preempting or I'm not deciding what the guidelines would be. But I think there has to be a guideline, because when I asked the question, the answer was that we don't have guidelines. The federal government has guidelines, but we know the federal government doesn't have clear guidelines too. So it's important for us to discuss this with some sort of a framework that actually details things rather than just tying us to federal government.
So what you're looking for is something which the staff, to do this, will reach out to communities that were affected with genocide or massacres, and it's very unfortunate that some of our colleagues don't recognize what the word genocide is.
Would this be something that you were looking for?
I'm not prescribing anything here. I'm asking for details. I'm asking the staff to tell me more than just to say we will only do it if the federal government names it. If you only tell me it's not a Toronto answer, it's not a Toronto answer to say we'll only do it if the federal government names it. I'm not satisfied with it. I want to be able to say, when will you do it? What are the guidelines we will use as city to do it? And what are the guidelines we have for the staff on frontline to allow them to do it? What is permitted to them? What's not permitted to them?
Councillor, I only got 30 seconds left, 15. Would you not encourage the staff to engage communities in order to develop Made in Toronto guidelines?
As in any other policy, I would encourage the staff to consult the community on the guidelines.
Thank you. Councillor Perks, question.
Thank you. Councillor Shan, I just want to make sure I understand your intention here. Is your intention to say we should take a different approach because we, as people who represent a diverse community and have local responsibilities to them, have a different duty than the federal government, which has international diplomacy and international law as their guiding principle?
Exactly. I'm saying we shouldn't be tied to the federal government explicitly and all the times. We should have the flexibility as a municipal government, reflective of the diversity, to have the flexibility and the agency for us to do things on our own rather than to be tied to federal government. And not just tied to federal government, tied to very specific function of naming those events at the federal government.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In regard to Made in Toronto guidelines, would it be your intention under Made in Toronto guidelines that our city staff should inform us as to whether or not there's a genocide going on in Myanmar right now?
No, Made in Toronto guidelines basically to say the council...
Why not?
Sorry?
Why not?
Because the city staff can bring us information on what people are saying at the door. Like, for example, if we have a certain population that is impacted in Scarborough that are going to recreation center for services and telling our recreational workers and youth workers that they are facing this at home, that's information that needs to filter into our council in ways. But it is it's an advocacy to federal government to have intervention. But it's for us to remember, allow us to remember. So it's not about whether somebody should tell us where genocide is happening, but if the population feels that they have a genocide happening to them, they should be permitted to have the agency to come and articulate it through council and to be able to commemorate themselves. That's the difference.
So who decides, under your motion then, but you want Made in Toronto guidelines, who would decide what's a genocide? Just any community that comes up and say, we were the victims of a genocide?
If there is a community that wants what's happening to them to be recognized as genocide, and they are advocating, and they have facts with them, they are advocating to council.
Sorry, they have what?
They have the facts with them to advocate to the council, and they are coming to you, and they are asking for your advocacy, asking for my advocacy. Then we have to act on it because that's what our role is as councillors as well.
All right, so Made in Toronto guidelines, and I'm just trying to clarify what this is, under Made in Toronto guidelines, they would differ from the federal government guidelines because we as city councillors would agree to listen to any group that came with facts that they had been the victim of a genocide. That's how Toronto guidelines would differ from federal guidelines?
The Toronto guidelines would be more responsive because of the fact of our diversity that we have in our...
Well, does the federal government not represent a diverse country?
They do.
They do.
But in fact, it's important for us to recognize that we are the closest government to people, and people reach out to municipal government to have their concerns heard. And, so it's important for us to be responsive to that.
Lovely.
Thank you. Councillor, I thought I seen a name. Okay, Councillor Wong Tam to speak.
Madam Speaker, and I'd like to move a motion to strike recommendation number 1. We would adopt recommendation number 2 as prescribed and recommended by staff, and to set up April as Genocide Remembrance Condemnation Prevention Month. I recognize that this particular topic is one that's creating a lot of emotions and a lot of conflicting thought amongst the members of council, Madam Speaker. But I think it's also very important for us to recognize that when we talk about the language of genocide and massacres under the UN definition and by way of international law, it becomes extremely technical. And we know that in international politics, it also becomes extremely political. So whether or not something is declared a genocide by the government of Canada is also going to be made in a very technical and political environment on the floor of the UN. So it would make, and I highlight that, Madam Speaker, because there's really only 5 genocides that the federal government has says it's a genocide. And I listed them earlier. It's the Holocaust, it's the Ukrainian genocide, it's the Armenian genocide, and the Rwandan genocide, and the Bosnian genocide. But it doesn't speak to the other genocides and massacres that we know are out there and not acknowledged, including the Cambodian genocide with 3 million people that were slaughtered there, and a whole people intentionally to be destroyed. The Bangladesh genocide, where we had up to 3 million people also killed there. The Greek genocide there, 750,000 people that were indiscriminately, brutally slaughtered. The Kurdish genocide, up to 200,000 people, again, indiscriminately, systematically murdered by the state. So I could go on, Madam Speaker, and I think it's important for us to recognize that under the framework of international law, our government, our federal government, is going to move very slowly. And they're going to take a look over their shoulder. And they're going to try to understand if they take a political position against perhaps a very prominent trading partner, perhaps a place of country origin where Canadian companies want to continue to further mine or do land resource development, they're going to want to tread very carefully. But I think that in this city, where we speak over 160 languages, we have cultural ambassadors that have called Toronto home, where literally every part of the world has some type of representation here. I think we can hold ourselves to a different standard. And I think that standard actually should be a much better and more accessible standard. I had some difficulty getting the Nanjing massacre recognized by our protocol office. They were following the rules. They checked with Ottawa to see if it was recognized as a massacre. And what happened in Nanjing? Well, in 1937, the Japanese Imperial Army marched into that country in China, and in 6 weeks, they slaughtered, raped civilians. 300,000 people died. Today, the Japanese nationalists will continue to deny it ever happened. You have 530,000 Chinese Canadians who are here. The Comfort Women movement is literally a movement that has brought shame and honor to Korea. And there's still no resolution and justice for those communities that have been harmed. And it remains a scar and a traumatic experience in the lives of people who are directly affected, including people who are living here, who are survivors of the war from abroad. So we get to have an opportunity when we do right by the world of justice. We get to have an opportunity by acknowledging the pain of communities who've traveled across dramatic flights and who've taken big adventures to come here to find a place of sanctuary where they can try to heal and be their whole selves. And all that does here is we just have to acknowledge that it happened. And we have to give them space to grieve, and we have to recognize that our strength, our greatest asset has always been diversity, has always been inclusion, and we can actually continue to do that. The policy that we have works fine.
Thank you.
I think we should continue to do what we've been doing. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carroll to speak. Okay, can we turn the mic on?
Or even the overhead?
I think it's on.
I'm hoping that is possible to see. Madam Speaker, you're looking at a map of the world in which you will find that some of the images here are in dark green and some are in light green. The difference between those two designations is in the dark green nations. Actual federal governments, nations, have acknowledged the Armenian genocide. In the light green nations, over time, over a century, municipalities, provinces, federal parties, state parties have recognized it on the pathway to a federal designation. Because that is the journey. That is the journey of the recognition of genocide in most cases. There's always a group that don't want it recognized, that will stand against that recognition. It's painful for them as it is for the victims, particularly if they are the descendants. It's not their wrong, and they feel pained at having to acknowledge and take responsibility for wrongdoing, and so it's always difficult to achieve that designation. That's what Councillor Wong Tam was getting at, that in the case of the rape of Nanking, it's true that a growing need to acknowledge it and move on is developing within the society that are the descendants of perpetrators, but not enough so that their nation is not going to organize against that recognition. And so other nations recognize. That's how this happens. Again and again. I'll turn that off so that you won't end up eventually looking at my screensaver. Madam Speaker, I'm supporting the motion by Councillor Shan because it is, in essence, asking staff to take another kick at the can. This is a report directly to us. We made a request and they're reporting directly to Council. I don't know if you'll be having clerks designate that if it's going to come back, it actually ought to make its way to Council through a committee. But I would suggest that would be the best pathway for it to find its way back to Council. The Made in Toronto solution is not necessarily, as Councillor Campbell pointed out in his questions, the concern being, do we then put ourselves in the position of, out of nowhere, making a determination? But if a movement is growing in our community, and we have to find some way to acknowledge it because it's very clear and there's a demonstrated action going on in a broad way in our community, trying to affect the very acknowledgement that we need to have federally, then we have to have some way to deal with that. And if the Made in Toronto solution says that, to allay the concerns of my colleague Councillor Holiday, that we don't gum up the works on this council floor, perhaps it has to be made clear that there have to be sponsors, there has to be whatever, it has to go through whatever committee path before it finds its way here, that consuls general have to be contacted, whatever is the Made in Toronto solution. We know from history that there are going to be those situations where you only get to the acknowledgement that people so badly need federally by starting in grassroots communities, then municipalities, then political parties, and so on until you get that nation's recognition. Those are my comments, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm actually quite happy with this report. It's something that I've wanted to see. I've seen a number of things happen over my time on council where recognitions take place in a less than organized, rational, and reasoned way. And so I think that we had to put some sort of framework around this, and I believe the public service have done that quite nicely. There is some talk of this, in air quotes, made in Toronto solution. Well, what the clerk's office have written is actually a made in Toronto solution. In fact, I was talking to, I have actually talked to consuls general who actually like this arrangement. I've talked to other city councillors who've heard about this in other municipalities, and they would like to get past this idea of spending hours and hours and hours with people fighting in committee rooms and all sorts of deputations on whether something should be recognized or not, and just deal with this in a rational, reasoned way. There was some discussion in this room about recognizing grassroots movements where people come down to City Hall and, they want this recognized. The words massacre and genocide are extremely serious words, and they have to be taken very seriously. And just because there is a movement to recognize something that happened doesn't necessarily we pick two of the most serious words we could find to put a black mark, where may be justified, but a black mark on a particular group of individuals. So I think this is the way to go. Staff don't have the resources, and then, I have seen notices of motion coming on this council floor for these type of recognitions. And I don't believe this council has the bandwidth, the councillors have the bandwidth to properly deliberate or decide this and do the proper research themselves. This makes it a whole lot easier. Fundamentally, this council shouldn't be dealing with international issues. I know that many people would like to consider themselves MPs and international relations experts, but that's not what we were brought here to do. We were brought here to make decisions, local decisions. So I think we should be spending our time doing things on a local basis. The federal government is the proper forum. They have the resources to do this. There is and there will be some level of uniformity, and it will stop the divisive debates that we've been having in council, that some councillors actually invite and enjoy and promote. We can have a way of dealing with this that will solve all those issues and all that unrest and unhappiness and divisiveness, and we can adopt an approach that makes sense for us, where we recognize these things in an intelligent way.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a motion, if the staff can put it on the board. And the motion reads that Council should apologize to the Rwanda community for not permitting the Rwanda flag to be raised at City Hall in 2017 for the commemoration of the Rwanda genocide. While we're going through these deliberations, the people that suffered the most and where the recognize has been done at the United Nations were not able to raise the flag. Now, for my colleague that does not know the word genocide, allow me to read it. And I hope, Councillor, you understand this. Councillor Burnside. So, Office of the UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide reads, legal definition of genocide. Genocide is defined in Article 2 of the Convention of the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, 1948, as, quote, as any following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. As such, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of a group, deliberately inflicting on a group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group, and forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Madam Speaker, we have had many genocides, and a lot of them have been recognized on this floor. So in the last century, I will go down the list and maybe I missed some. There's the Pontian Greek genocide.
There's the Armenian genocide that was recognized in the House of Commons and here, the Holodomor, the Nanjing massacre, the Holocaust. When the Holocaust and Hitler was deciding in the last solution, he quoted in August of 1939, "Who remembers the Armenian genocide?" And he went on to perpetrate 6 million deaths. Cambodia, although it hasn't been recognized, and I could be wrong here, millions of people died. Cyprus, the invasion of Cyprus, 1,700 people are still missing. In Kurdistan, when Saddam Hussein, the man that we hated the most, in 1988 of March, he absolutely destroyed his own people in Halabja, and he killed 5,000 by gassing them. The Anfal genocide in the same place, 150,000 Kurds were killed. And today, we're asking them to help us fight ISIS. What happened in Darfur? In Sri Lanka, hundreds of thousands of Tamils. Your people were ravaged, your people were killed. After the tsunami, I went to Point Pedro in the north, and the army was too busy putting their sheds back together, they didn't give a damn about the Tamil people. In Syria today, what's happening today in Rohingya, it does not take a rocket scientist. The only thing you got to read is the definition. And if anybody wants the definition, I'll certainly circulate. So the situation is that we, that represent the most ethnically diverse city in the world, we have the largest diplomatic corps that after any capital, and only after New York City, where they got United Nations, the largest diplomatic corps is in this country. These people come to us and say, we want something. Yesterday, the Nigerians, how many of you remember what happened in Biafra in 1969, 1970? Guess what, folks? It's happening right now. The Nigerians came and protested outside for their government to send a message. They couldn't go to Queen's Park. They started from Queen's Park and came here. Not everybody can go to Ottawa, and Ottawa does not always listen. The government of the day has interests in trade. And when he came to the Armenian genocide, the minister of the day, Bill Graham, my colleague, says don't recognize it. Why? Because they had interest in selling the nuclear reactors to Turkey. And Turkey threatened that if we recognized the Armenian genocide, that we're not going to buy the nuclear reactors and AECL was going to go out of business. Well, you just don't put your head as an ostrich in the sand and say, this didn't happen. Ask James, ask Mr. Shiner, ask me, and the rest, James Pasternak. Nathan, we are products of the genocide. Ask my good friend Joe Mahevic. He'll tell you what happened in his country in Srebrenica and Srebrenica. You know, it is all around us. And it's not a laughing matter, Councillor. Absolutely not. Because the people that we represent, those are the people that come to us and say, we want our voices to be heard. And what happened in this council by recognizing the Pontian genocide right now is in front of the Senate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your time's up. Councillor Holliday.
Speaker. Thank you, Speaker. One of the things that I've grown to appreciate is the value of the people's time, and what I mean by that is it takes enormous resources to run this chamber, and every second that ticks by and every minute that ticks by comes at a cost. And there's two costs. There's a financial one, but there's also the impact on the business of the city. And so in respect to that, I'm going to be really brief, but I struggle with this a lot because I think about the types of things that councillors are supposed to manage. We're supposed to resource the machine here to make sure that we've got clean flowing water, that we've got waste that's picked up, that we've got roads that work, that we've got city planning and development that it occurs. And I don't know about you, but I feel significantly challenged just to make sure that that happens. But what we're talking about in the chamber today is actually another line of business. It's almost like discussing setting up a secretariat to support us to discuss world issues. I don't mean to belittle or take away from the importance these are on people. I believe that. I believe even with my own family experiences, we've got our own take on world politics. But I really struggle when that type of politics enters this chamber because I think it really should be left for those orders of government where it belongs. I think we have our hands full just dealing with the bricks and mortar of keeping this place operational. And I would just suggest to councillors, when you're thinking about this motion, you really keep your focus on what's the matter at hand, what the constituents ask of us, the really simple day-to-day things that we struggle just to deliver as we are as a group. And really think about what the value is and what the necessity is to go into another line of business and another layer of debate and create another piece of government and another piece of machinery to handle world issues. With that, I just hope we keep focused on our jobs here.
Thank you. Councillor Perruzza.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, from my perspective, the conversation that we're having here today is this. The provincial government sort of created, we are a creation of the province, right? Our staff will tell us all the time. We're members of a board of directors, right? With a very, very specific role in terms of what this government is legally entitled and legislated to do, and what we should be doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You all know it. You've all heard it. You're a member of the board of directors of the Corporation of the City of Toronto, incorporated by the province of Ontario, a creation of the province of Ontario. Problem with that is this: that your public, your residents, don't see you as a member of a board of directors. They don't see you as just a guy or woman that is here to deal with stop signs, planning application, bylaw infractions, or whatever else it is that is included in that definition of the Board of Directors of the City of Toronto. They see you and they elect you to be their voice, their representative, and they see the City of Toronto as a level of government, whether you like it or not. They don't see it as a board of directors. I think that if tradition, and we have an element in body of law, an element of our law and our body of law that is traditionally based in tradition. Tradition would suggest that you're, albeit a much smaller level of government than both the federal and the provincial governments, but a level of government nonetheless. So your public comes to you and says, my voice, my representative, which you are, I want to chat with you about this very, very important issue. It's an important issue to me and my community. They don't go away and say, sorry, I'm a member of a board of directors and it doesn't fall within my purview to be able to discuss. It doesn't fall within my ambit of responsibility. They don't get that. They don't understand that explanation. We get it because our staff, they explain it to us. There's probably an orientation when you first get elected which says this is how, I think they now have a course on how a director should behave. I understand that. I get that. But that's not the way you run in an election. That's not the way you get elected. And that's not the way the public, your public, sees you as their political representative. So yes, while sometimes it is hard for us to sit here for some hours on end to debate a subject area which we are, generally speaking, have very little knowledge of. We're dependent on information from people who are more knowledgeable than we are. And yes, we don't have it as a department like the Parks Department or the Works Department, or we don't have the expertise on staff to be able to, say, let's get on a plane and let's go to that country. Let's figure out what happened there. Let's go visit those folks. like they do in Ottawa, or like they may be able to do at Queen's Park, because they have some capacity to do that at Queen's Park as well. While we may not be able to do that, we are the sounding board, the early sounding board, and quite frankly, any position which we take on it is a city position. And sometimes an uninformed position in many cases, but a position nonetheless which carries some weight and which has some relevance and some importance. And we shouldn't be afraid to have those conversations here. We shouldn't be afraid to educate ourselves in that, and we shouldn't be afraid to spend a little time on it, because that's what our public expects of us. That's what they pay us for, to be their advocates, to be their voice on a great range of issues, even though we may not have the legislative authority to do anything about it.
Thank you, Councillor Perruzza. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Speaker, and I will follow in Councillor Holliday's footsteps in that I will be brief, but I think I will present a counterpoint, which is simply to say that we are indeed a city of many people, and a city of many people with different backgrounds. And in representing our residents, I believe we have a duty to represent their history, both the good and the awful and the tragic. And so just as we as a city raise national flags for countries, we should also recognize those genocides that have taken place, so that we collectively never forget, but also so that we remain and are a welcoming city to people from around the world. And it's for that reason that I'll be supporting Councillor Wong Tam's motion, and I hope you will be too. Thank you.
Okay, ready to vote? In order? Okay, motion 1. Recorded vote. Motion 1, recorded vote. Yes, Councillor Shan?
I would assume number 2 goes first before 1 because I'm...
Well, no, that's not the way it works.
Doesn't it?
No.
Okay.
I'm okay with that one.
How the motions are presented, that's how we vote.
Simply the way it gets played.
Okay, recorded vote.
Councillor Doucette, please. Councillor Shan, please. And Councillor Bailao.
Councillor Mihevc, please. And Councillor Holland and Councillor Palacio, please.
Councillor McMahon. Motion 1 does not carry. The vote is 17 to 22.
Motion 2, recorded vote.
Councillor Palacio, please.
Motion 2 carries. The vote is 23 to 16.
Motion 3. Motion 3.
Councillor DeGiorgio, please. Councillor McMahon.
Councillor Holland, please.
Motion 3 carries. The vote is 32-7.
Okay, item is amended. All in favor? Carried. Page 4, EX 27.4, third-party election. Signs. Councillor Layton, you held the item down. Do you have questions to staff? Okay, questions to staff. Councillor Layton.
There was a rather lively debate at Executive Committee on this item, and I'm just curious. So the new provincial election rules allow any corporation or any individual to erect billboards that can influence the outcome of the election, with the purpose of influencing the outcome of the election.
Through the Speaker, the Municipal Election Act, in addition to an individual and a corporation, also enables trade unions to advertise on a billboard or another form of advertising, as long as they register with the city clerk and follow the rules outlined in the MEA. And the intent would be to oppose or support a candidate in the election.
So the question, and I don't know if maybe I just didn't hear it, was yes, a corporation or a union could fund a positive or a negative campaign against any candidate, councillor or mayor.
That's correct, and an individual.
So a developer, for instance, a real estate developer who doesn't like the outcome or who has a pending application at the city could potentially, with registering with the city, of course, could erect a billboard saying, "Don't vote for this councillor. They make poor decisions."
Through the Speaker, that is correct, Councillor.
And there's no standards associated with what language can be used on the signs. There's no one fact-checking the premise of the signs. Someone could erect a sign that says, "Councillor Pasternak hates parks."
It's not really issues, does it?
Parks.
Through the,
or perks.
Through the Speaker, the intent of advertising isn't really issue-based. It's more around supporting or opposing an actual individual candidate. And in your example of the developer, they would be considered a third-party advertiser as long as they registered with the clerk and the billboard or the advertisement included the minimal information the MEA requires, which is who they are for transparency purposes and a few other pieces of information.
So, but that's not a no. So if a developer didn't want to say, I don't support this Councillor X because they're not approving my development, they're not likely to say that. They're more than likely to say, don't support Councillor X because they don't like trees and parks. I didn't use your name there, Councillor. Sorry. Is that they don't have to say the subject of why they have an interest in they just can put whatever they want.
Yeah, that would be correct.
And if someone could, is there anyone fact checking the signs? There's a lot of reporting on fake news these days. So if someone was to put up a sign that says Councillor X voted this way on an issue, but in fact Councillor X voted the opposite way, is there anyone checking that?
Through the Speaker, no, there is no one checking that I would be aware of. The only other thing I would say, Councillor, is that third-party advertisement has happened in all of our previous elections. The difference in the 2018 election is it's the first time it's going to be regulated.
But it hasn't happened to a great degree in these previous elections.
It was certainly legal to happen. It was just not a regulated activity.
Wasn't there, though, there were regulations against third-party advertising with signs?
No. No, we have not had any regulations related to third-party advertising until the amendments to the Municipal Elections Act.
Who enforces then what and when someone registers? Is that the elections office downstairs?
That's correct.
So, and then how fast is that turnaround? If someone puts a billboard up, are we able to display that information online? You can say, here's who paid for it.
So in the example of a billboard, that particular third-party advertisement would be the purview of the Municipal Licensing and Standards Division. So I'm not sure what their service levels are. If it was a different kind of advertisement, if they registered with the clerk, then that information should be available fairly quickly. Is that right?
Thank you. Councillor Billion. Oh.
Fillion. I might need some legal, because he had a lot of legal questions. Yeah.
Councillor Fillion.
Thank you. So, first of all, on the signs, just 'cause I'm not entirely clear, if somebody puts up a sign saying "Don't vote for Councillor Smith," does that have to comply with the sign bylaws, or does it not because it's a third-party sign? Sorry, the election sign bylaws, I meant to say.
So that billboard would need to comply with both the requirements in the Municipal Election Act related to third-party advertisement as well as the city's sign bylaw.
Right, I know the city sign bylaw, but would need to comply with the same rules that you have for candidates putting up signs or not?
Yes, that's correct.
Are candidates now allowed to put up billboards?
Yeah, to answer your question, as long as the candidate has erected a billboard in compliance with the required rules under the chapters and it's an election sign and regulated and permitted, then therefore they could. Obviously, if there's campaign expenses, there would be limits to what would be possible.
Okay, but there's no the regulations on the size of the sign, for example. There's regulations on the size of election signs, right? That wouldn't
That's
normally
correct.
permit a billboard. Would or wouldn't permit a billboard?
There are, in the sign bylaw, there are rules around the size, placement, and other matters related to election signs, including third-party advertising.
Okay, I'll pursue that for later. Literature. So if a developer wanted to set up a third-party election.
Councillor, if I can excuse, I'm going to hold your time. I'm having a really hard time hearing you, so I'm guessing staff probably are as well. If I can have quiet in the council chamber for the questioner to be able to hear the staff and vice versa. Councillors, Councillor Perks, Burnside, Davis, can we voices down? Thank you.
So with material, printed material, could be distributed saying, Councillor Smith doesn't like trees and parks, to use the example Councillor Layton gave. And that could be paid for by a developer who doesn't like Councillor Smith, but, so is that part correct?
Through the speaker, that would be considered third-party advertisement, and as long as they had registered with the clerk, then they could do that.
And do they have to register with the clerk? Can they make up a name? Can they say we're the North York Citizens Alliance?
So generally speaking, when a candidate or third-party advertiser registers with the clerk, there is particular information that we ask for, including identification and other pieces of ID that would confirm that they are who they are.
On the literature, could someone say it's the North York Civic Action League and put that on their literature, that's who's producing this literature.
The name on the literature would need to be the same name that's registered with the city clerk.
And the name that's registered with the city clerk, does that have to be a person's name or can it be an entity?
So they have to be an individual, a corporation, or a trade union, and if they're a corporation or a trade union, they'd need to be an individual that would be representing those entities.
Couldn't be a numbered company?
It could be, I suppose, a numbered company, but again, you need an individual that would be representing that numbered company.
Okay. And do we know the limit on third-party advertising?
So the province has not yet released the spending limits for third-party advertising. We're expecting them in the next few months, as well as mandatory forms that the clerk's office will need to fill out related to third-party advertising.
And none of this counts towards someone's limit. So again, if you had a group of developers or land speculators who each wanted to put a group together that would act as a third-party advertiser, they could theoretically do 5 of those at whatever the limit is, and there's no restriction on that.
Yeah. So I think in that scenario, Councillor, they'd still have to follow the spending limits and submit their financial statements and an audited financial statement.
Last question.
Yeah, but there could be 5 different ones of those, all following whatever the rules are that we don't know what they are yet.
That's correct.
Last question. Thank you, Councillor Fillion. Councillor Holliday?
Thank you, Speaker. I just need a bit of help understanding what was allowed prior to the changes in the legislation.
So
prior to the Act, was somebody allowed, a third party allowed to mail out any sort of a literature, either during a campaign or outside of a campaign, at their will?
So prior to the changes to the Municipal Elections Act, there were no rules for third-party advertising, period.
Okay, so somebody, even today, could mail something out that either supports or does not support a particular councillor. They're entitled to do that. They can hand out flyers, they can drop them in mailboxes, they can mail them right now.
That would be correct, Councillor, because we're not yet in the campaign period.
Okay, same for radio, same for television, same for internet, billboards. Somebody could go rent a billboard and say whatever they want on it, provided it doesn't violate, I guess, advertising standards.
That's correct, Councillor, because at this point in time there are no candidates. A candidate can't register until May 1st, 2018.
Okay, so by the sounds of things, and I'm going to get to the signs in a second, this is generally an enhancement in terms of clarity for the public, because at least now with the changes in the legislation, one may identify who is working the campaign, and there's some traceability because of the requirement to register. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think the province's intent was to regulate it and increase transparency.
Okay, now I just want to go back to signs. Prior to the changes in the legislation, could a third party, for any reason, create a sign campaign? What does that mean?
Sorry, we had trouble hearing you, Councillor. If you could just repeat your question.
Prior to the changes in the Act, could a third party do a sign campaign? Could Group XYZ advocating for a new community centre put out signs?
Councillor, that's correct. Yes, they could.
They could, so people could plunk them onto the lawn. I don't mean billboards, but I mean plunk them on the lawns just like an election sign.
That's right. In fact, in those cases, they likely would have been treated as election signs previously.
No, what if it's outside of an election period? Can they do that?
So there are still restrictions and regulations for those signs. Generally, I believe that they would be limited, but that they might be possible in certain circumstances.
Okay, now let's go back to during the last election period, if a group, a third party, an entity, decided to create a sign campaign that either supported or did not support a particular candidate or a question that may have been on the ballot, were they allowed to do so? Were they allowed to augment what was going on in the area with their own sign campaign?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I just want to be clear on that. So the enhancement then in this case is that they are then once again registered and tracked so that that information is then available.
Yes, that's correct, Councillor. There were also additional amendments to Chapter 693 to clarify the role of third-party advertisers in the regulations for election signs. That, I think, strengthens the accountability on the election signs framework. And then there are additional requirements now under the Municipal Elections Act as well.
Are there any additional rights, provisions, things that a third party may do under the new legislation that they were not allowed to do before? Are there any enhancements to their rights? Or are they basically allowed to do anything they were doing before, they just have to register?
So through the speaker, there really weren't any rules before, so I think that the change in the MEA for third-party advertisers is they now actually have limits and rules that they need to adhere to, whereas before they didn't.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Councillor Holiday. Hang on a second. Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm just going to re-ask a couple of the questions that I asked in committee because I want my other colleagues to hear the answers. But when it came to the banning of corporate donations for municipal elections, Toronto was the leader in that area, was one of the leading municipalities to forbid corporate donations and in essence opt out of various options of the Municipal Elections Act.
That's correct. Council chose, I believe, to ban corporate and union donations in 2009, if memory serves me correctly, and we were the first municipality in Ontario to do so.
We were the only one with...
Now, the donation rebate program was also a Toronto innovation. It's the provisions of the Municipal Elections Act allowed for it. Toronto opted in on those provisions, but not every municipality has it. Some do, some don't. It's an opt-in, opt-out option.
That's correct, Councillor. Council can choose to authorize the clerk to implement a contribution rebate program and pass a bylaw, but they're not required to do so.
Now, when it comes to the third-party election advertising enforcement, under the way the statute or I guess the preliminary legislation is written now, there's no opt-out provision. We are bound by those rules?
So in the Municipal Elections Act, the third-party advertising framework has no opt-out provision, and it is a statutory requirement.
But nothing would preclude us from asking for an opt-out provision. After all, there's a precedent for us being a leader in various aspects of municipal elections in the past.
So when Council considered a report about a year and a half ago on Bill 68, which were amendments to the City of Toronto Act, Council at that time did ask the City Manager to request the Province of Ontario to delete the third-party advertising framework from Bill 68. The City Manager wrote a letter to that effect to the province, and in fact, Councillor DiCiano was Councillor's representative at Standing Committee and included that request in his speaking notes when he deputed at Standing Committee, and the Standing Committee chose not to do so.
So we did our best, but we weren't successful. I guess there's no harm in trying again. When it comes to the auditing of third-party advertisers, is there an audit function? Can someone request an audit to make sure they follow the rules?
So through the Speaker, the framework for the third-party advertising in terms of the financial disclosure is very similar to candidates. So an elector could request an audit through the Compliance Audit Committee, and then they would make a determination whether or not they were going to do so.
Is there a risk of a candidate, whether an incumbent or a challenger, partnering with one of these third-party advertisers as part of the campaign?
The MEA is very explicit in that a candidate cannot direct or contribute to a third-party advertiser's campaign.
Cannot contribute.
Contribute or direct.
Yes.
You can't make a contribution or direct a third-party ad.
So cannot make a financial contribution or provide
direct.
guidance or input.
That would be correct.
And how enforceable, under the provisions of the Act, how enforceable do you think that is?
What do I say about enforcement?
What are the provisions for enforcement?
So, obviously it's difficult to speculate as to how these provisions could be enforced, but I will say that the Act does have enforcement provisions that entitle any elector to seek penalties imposed through prosecution. There are also opportunities for individuals to make complaints, to have the matters reviewed in the advertisements, potentially removed if that's part of the issue.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Speaker. I'm just trying to get some clarity and understand when I was reading the report. So donations, they're defined as individuals, corporations, or unions when it comes to tracking on third-party advertising. But it's not clear about groups. So if I have a group of people and they love Councillor Ainsley, so to speak, are they required to advertise? Are they required to register as a third-party advertiser? If I have a group of individuals?
So technically, Councillor, the MEA doesn't allow groups to engage in third-party advertisement. The Act is clear that it needs to be an individual, a corporation, a trade union.
But it's silent on groups.
It is silent on groups. So my interpretation of that is that groups would not be allowed. The intent of the regulatory framework is transparency. So if you've got an advertisement, it is required now that they need to say who the third-party advertiser is and who's funding it. And if it's a group, it might get very difficult to put all that information on one sign or advertisement.
So I could get a group of people, I could get all my in-laws to all donate $1,200, and they could do third-party advertising and they don't have to report to anybody.
No, I would say that it would be illegal for them to engage in third-party advertising, that they're not qualified to do that as a group.
Okay. Right. And then going back to somebody that has to register, individuals, corporations, unions that have to register. So there's a $1,200 individual limit, and they have a maximum of $5,000 that they can donate to any third-party advertisers. But you could have a company, any company that has 15 executives, and they can all individually donate $1,200 to a third-party advertiser. There's no cap.
That would be correct, yes. If they're an individual and they register, then they would have a $1,200 limit that they could contribute to third-party advertising.
So hypothetically, I could have a developer in my ward that's got 20 executives. They could all donate $1,200 individually, and there's no cap, as opposed to my $30,000 spending limit.
So there is going to be a spending limit on third-party advertising. As I said previously to another questioner, the province hasn't yet released that information, and we're expecting it in the next few months.
Okay. So, and sorry, that leads to my next. So the date that the regulations are expected to be issued sometime within the next few months?
The province hasn't given us anything more definitive than that. We're waiting for regulations on a number of items in the MEA. Our hope is that we were going to get them in the fall. I think it could be closer to the spring for some of them, which makes it difficult for us to implement some of them in time for 2018.
Okay. And when it comes to third-party advertising, there can't be any third-party advertising that commences until May 1st?
So third-party advertising can commence April 1st, 2018, and then the campaign period for candidates starts May 1st, 2018.
So third-party advertising is allowed by the provincial regulations can start a full month before
yes, but they can't actually register until May 1st, 2018, but technically they can start I suppose, some preliminary work on April 1st, 2018, based on the MEA.
So as a candidate, so somebody can start advertising against a candidate in the 2000 election a full month before they can even register to run for office?
So they wouldn't be able to advertise until they register with the clerk, and I'm not quite clear why they made April 1st the date for third-party advertising, because May 1st is the campaign period and the registration date. I'm assuming that they gave them 1 month potentially to get themselves organized before they register with the clerk and then start advertising.
Okay. And then, so what commonly happens in the States, and I'm also unclear about this, is so if there's a third-party advertiser in my ward, how far back does it get tracked? So you have a corporation, bunch of individuals, their executives all give money to a third-party advertising in a given ward. How far back does it get followed in terms of ownership? Because what happens commonly in the States is you have a large corporation that donates to a to another company, that it trickles down. How far back do we follow that? Does it get followed any further than who registers?
That was your last question.
So, Councillor, I don't know that there would be any kind of investigation of those matters. It would really be through the Compliance Audit Committee and through their financial disclosure.
Thank you. Councillor Perks?
Madam Speaker, may I just be permitted to correct some information that was just provided? Actually, the third-party advertising provisions do not come into effect until May the 1st, not April the 1st.
Okay, thank you.
It's the act that, or this portion of the act that doesn't come into effect until April 1st.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Perks?
Thank you, Speaker. I have quite a number of questions, so I'm going to go a little quick. People in previous elections who put up signs during election campaigns were bound by our sign bylaw. That's correct?
That's correct.
Similarly, people were bound by the rule that candidates can only spend money on signs or literature or leaflets if it's authorized by them. They can't use a third party to funnel additional money in. True. If you put up a sign as a candidate, it has to be authorized by your campaign. Similarly, if you put out a piece of literature, it has to be authorized by your campaign. Purchase.
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay, so those two rules did exist. They couldn't just throw up signs anywhere, and they couldn't coordinate with campaign candidates. Okay, so there were some rules around this before. Now, moving forward, first of all, there's a principle in Canadian law that was established in a case, Hudson v. Spraytech, which allowed municipalities, this is about the pesticide bylaw, to regulate in excess of federal or provincial regulation law, as long as they didn't create a double bind where you can't meet both simultaneously. Is that correct?
So your description of the Spraytech case is generally correct, yes.
Yeah, I could go into more detail. I know it better than that, but we've got limited time. So
do I, Councillor.
And my understanding is the guidance is further that if we're operating for the general welfare of Torontonians, we can put additional regulatory frameworks as long as they don't violate that general principle that I mentioned before.
So yes, to be a little bit more nuanced, if the city has a valid municipal purpose and does not create a conflict with a provincial legislation, then there is ability to, of course, regulate.
Okay, thank you. Next, when the City of Toronto is going to be the government that is actually registering these people?
Third-party advertisers would be registered by the city clerk.
Okay. In your registration, it's not like the province is going to give you a registration form, I imagine. We're going to have to come up with something.
So the province actually does give us a prescribed form that we're still waiting for.
Okay. Could we require an affidavit that says, I, the Friends of Giorgio Mammoliti, have not received any direction or had any communication about the content of my materials, the placement of these materials, which is a requirement in the Provincial Act. We could require an affidavit like that, couldn't we?
Through the Speaker, I don't think so, Councillor.
Yeah, just to second that, we feel that the right for those third-party advertisers cannot be abrogated by further restrictions.
I'm not interested in what you feel. I'm wondering about whether it's within the city's ability to do that.
We've looked pretty closely at the options here, and it's our view that any further regulation would either be seen as a frustration of the purpose of the provincial regime, or would run contrary to, or obviously I'm speaking in the abstract, but we would have some freedom of expression concerns.
Right, but if we're specifically doing something to attempt to add to the regulatory clarity around something in the legislation, which is that the candidate cannot direct the third party, simply requiring someone to sign a piece of paper saying they've done that doesn't frustrate anything in the legislation. Well, you can think about that one
It's very
some more.
difficult to say when we haven't seen all of the
Right.
forms and the regulations from the province.
Okay, that leads me to my next question. I assume that some city staff are in conversation with the provincial government, probably at a minimum saying, would you hurry up? But also trying to get some tools that make it clear and easy. Could we bring things like, we would like it to be similar to our requirement that there not be corporate or union money, that we would like there to be clearer tools about the relationship between these people and candidates. We're still in a position where we can say those things to them, yes?
That would be correct, Councillor.
Okay, I think that's my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor DiCiano.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. I think there was a few attempts to get this question answered, and I don't know that it came out properly, so I'm going to ask it again. A third-party advertiser registers with the city. Will we know in real time who that person is, whether it's an entity or an individual, or only after the election once the audited financials have been submitted?
That would happen immediately, Councillor, as soon as we can release that information after the individual has been in to see us.
So if it is a residence for a healthier and prosperous Etobicoke, it will have a name attached to that organization, and both the organization and the name will be posted in real time.
That would be correct. Through one of our systems, an application that we use to track this, it would be posted on our website.
Okay, so we have the capability to do that. So why don't we have the capability to do that with ourselves in terms of who is donating to our campaigns? Why can't we have that information in real time as well?
I'll put the time on hold.
So we do have an application for candidates, but I don't think we're required by law to include information around your contributions in that application.
But council could act in that fashion. We could ask for that? Or is there a confidentiality around that?
You raise the money later.
It's just transparent.
So my understanding is the application provides a bookkeeping function for the candidate. The candidate can enter that information, but the information doesn't become public until we get the financial statements from the candidate.
Okay. So we will have in real time who the organizations and who the people behind the organizations are.
That's correct.
And I thought that I read back in the day that these organizations could spend up to $100,000. Is that only for the provincial election, or is that for?
So I'm not sure where that number came from, Councillor. We have not yet had the spending limits identified from the province, and we're still waiting for that.
Okay. Would you agree that the province has basically allowed us, or allowed the process to include super PACs now, where outside organizations, entities can now influence elections? How is this different than a super PAC in the United States?
I'm not sure I can speculate on that, Councillor.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Aljamari.
Okay.
What is the enforcement mechanism for an individual or a corporation or a trade union that does not register with the clerk and puts up billboards?
So again, the Municipal Elections Act does enable the city to require those advertisements to be removed. So non-compliant advertisements and an advertisement put up by an unregistered third-party advertiser would be not compliant. The subject of the report is to seek a process to enable some enforcement of those types of provisions, and of course violations of the Act also come with penalties and fines.
The $1,200 limit is for any individual or corporation or trade union to donate to a third-party sign campaign?
So that's correct, to a third-party advertising campaign, not just signs, it could be other methods.
So an individual can donate $1,200 for $1,200 for many campaigns, $750 for councillors directly, and also the mayoralty campaign, which is what, $1,500?
So for third-party advertising, an individual, corporation, or trade union is allowed to donate $1,200 to a registered third-party advertiser, or a total of $5,000 to multiple third parties that are registered in the same municipality.
And
so they have put a limit on it.
And another $5,000 for
$5,000 to 3 or more within the same municipality.
So 5,000 and 5,000.
1,200 and 5,000. 1,200 to one, 5,000 to more than one in one municipality. Those are the limits.
Okay. In the last campaign, there were signs that were illegal put up, billboard signs. Is that correct?
I can't comment on that. I wasn't working the last election. Sorry, Councillor. I don't know if anyone else is.
Councillor, you're referring to certain signs in Ward 9, I believe?
That's the ward, yeah.
Yes. There was an investigator hired, and I believe the city solicitor can explain what happened on that investigation.
I think for the purpose of responding to your question, Councillor, I can confirm that there was third-party advertising last election. That was the first time in my recollection that we did get some complaints about third-party advertising.
I want you to comment on how effective it was to this enforcement mechanism. What happened?
I actually don't recall how everything played out, but I think I can say that it was not particularly effective.
Not particularly
effective.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have people flouting our laws. We have at least one candidate that can put up, what was it, 10 billboards in one little ward. That's not the point. The point is our enforcement mechanisms. It's open season. But I'm asking questions. Okay. So the promotion of a candidate can be totally overshadowed now by a corporation or even an individual that can purchase, with purchase power, take up all the billboards within one ward.
Subject to the spending limit that the province will be setting.
Okay, last question. Why did the province do this? We didn't ask for this.
That is correct, Councillor. This was not a request that came from staff or City Council, and in fact was not something we were aware of until they included in the MEA. The province does have a similar regime in place.
Oh.
So I'm assuming they kind of decided that it was time for Toronto and other municipalities to have the same thing.
So I see this as a backdoor way, not so backdoor, for corporations to get back into the game with full force. Am I incorrect?
That was your last question.
Thank you.
Oh, I thought you were waiting for an answer. Okay. Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, I'm just going to go over, having had the same types of signs that pop up, just feedback what I've heard, that the anybody but Burnside sign would now have to have a name of an organization or an individual on it that was promoting that campaign. Is that correct?
That's correct, including their contact information.
On the actual sign?
That's correct.
And I guess and they would have to be registered here, and we don't know what their spending limit is because the province hasn't said so, but anyone can donate $1,200 one time to that campaign, that sign campaign or billboard campaign.
That's correct, except for a candidate.
Yeah, I understand,
Yeah.
except for the candidate, not everybody can. So I guess what I'm going to ask now is, should there be signs go, and it's got to do with this. There is somebody who signs up that have nothing on them. Your response will be to take them down immediately. Say there's the anybody but Burnside, but there's no identification on it. That sign would now be illegal, correct?
That's correct. It would also violate the city's sign bylaw.
Well, what I want to know is how fast you're planning to remove those. You will have a plan to remove those signs.
Yeah, that's not something that obviously staff on this side, legal staff or clerks can comment.
Well, let's hold my time for a second because I want some MLS staff here. I want some MLS staff because I'm assuming, and I'm going to ask this to my team at the back, I'm assuming you've had these conversations with MLS and they have now built their budget for 2018 with this in mind, extra enforcement. Am I correct or not correct that you've had these conversations?
So through you, Madam...
No, I'm talking here first.
Oh.
Am I correct or not correct that you've had these conversations with MLS?
You're correct. We have had conversations with MLS.
And you have indicated your expectation of the removal of illegal signs, and what time limit, what time frame have you requested? Given election is very finite period. Have you requested a time frame?
I don't think we got into that level of detail yet, Councillor.
So that's something that's missing so far. That your turnaround time would be expected as to be 24 hours?
So city staff still need to work through some of the operating issues related to the third-party advertising. Again, we're a year away from the
That's
election,
fine.
and we
Yes,
certainly
but
understand we need to operationalize it.
We can ask for that back. We're also in the budget discussions right now, so I'm interested in how many new staff will be hired for the election period expressly to deal with the plethora of third-party signs, removing them, enforcing the issues. How many? How many have you now put in, Ms. Cook, for your budget?
Through you, Madam Speaker, neither in this upcoming budget nor in the budgets prior did we allocate additional resources for the enforcement of the election signs issue. We have taken our staff out of our existing complement, focused them and dedicated them to that 25-day period to address all election sign issues.
The 25 days, when, tell me the date that the third-party advertisers can start with their signs.
May the 1st.
So May the 1st is when they can put up the anybody but Burnside sign. Sorry, I'm using you, Councillor. And councillors can put up their lawn signs on what day? What day do councillors now put up their signs in the upcoming election?
Signs.
The same day.
May the 1st. May the 1st? No?
Just for clarification, I think there's a bit of a confusion about when
Okay,
third
let's
party...
stop the time. I did. Thank you.
Third-party advertising versus third-party signs.
That's correct. I think there's a bit of confusion about when a third-party advertiser can engage in any form of advertising, which is May 1st under the MEA, and when they can begin erecting election signs, which is governed by Chapter 693 in MLS.
Is what day?
25 days prior to the election date.
And so what is the activity that you're expecting they would be engaged in? Newspaper ads, flyers, prior to the actual erection of signs? Is that what you're anticipating?
So again, any of those paid advertisements would be possible after May 1st.
Okay. And the last thing that I want to know is if someone, as happens regularly, has come down, they've filled out a form, they've put down their phone number, and then when Councillor Burnside phones in and says, here's who's in charge, now we have somebody who's actually not existent, or someone whose phone isn't working anymore, or someone who's just creating some trouble for that candidate. What is your plan at that point? Would you be removing those signs? And this is a very real situation, actually.
So through you, Madam Speaker, anybody who erects an election sign or one that's deemed to be an outsider election sign outside of the election period,
No, I'm not
it would be an
talking about
offense.
that. I think people don't understand. Somebody's going to come down, they're going to put in their name, they're going to put in their phone number, they're going to give identification, they're going to print 1 million signs, they're going to put them all up, and that person isn't going to exist in order to, if something is on there that's wrong. If there's a problem with that, there's not going to be a real person any longer to deal with. So I'm interested in how you're planning to deal with that and those 5,000 signs.
Okay, that was your last question.
So through you, Madam Speaker, I'm hoping I'm understanding Councillor Fletcher. The amendments to the temporary sign bylaw governing election signs, which was inclusive of the third-party signs, prescribes that the person who posted the signs has to be named. That person has to be registered with the city clerk for the purpose of doing that. We would take the signs down.
Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I put my name down for a specific set of questions, but before that, I'm now a little unclear. Billboards are under the 25-day period sign bylaw, or they start as of May 1st?
Yeah, so I'll defer if the executive director wants to comment, but again, that would be considered an election sign, therefore governed by Chapter 693 and subject to that smaller window of display.
To the smaller period. So contracting and dispatching staff on that task, that's an expensive task if we've got non-compliant billboards up, but they'd only be enforcing for about a month. That's a shorter contract? Anyone? Bueller?
Yeah, yes, I think your point is valid.
Okay. I just wanted to be clear on that. And the other thing I wanted to be clear on is what, in fact, we're in this interim period where the province hasn't finished the steps, because they haven't yet told us what the spending limits are for the third-party registrant, and they haven't shown us the forms, which will tell us a lot about what their accountability expectations are. In this interim period, have they welcomed municipalities telling them what they hope to see in those final strokes? Have we made it clear to them that as a municipality, we're not crazy about third-party advertising, so set as stringent a spending limit as you like? Have we had an opportunity to do that?
Through the Speaker, we have had some conversations with the province, and we have communicated some information we would like to see in the forms that we're expecting shortly, and we've certainly been advocating for a sooner timeline than the spring. For Toronto, we have a software system that we need to update, and that takes some time and energy to do so, and we need the form and the information to do it.
And the spending limit?
And the spending limit, it would
have
be...
lobbied them a bit about that?
We've had many conversations about the spending limit.
Okay. And lastly, I just wanted to address, and funnily enough, he's now sitting beside me. Councillor DiCiano was asking earlier about the idea of disclosing in real time the expenditures of the third party. Once they register, we want to know who they are in real time. So we can set up a web page where that information will be disclosed pre-election day.
So, Councillor, we don't disclose their contributions in real time. My understanding is we wait to disclose that information until we get their financial statements and an audited statement from the third-party advertiser.
So
Very similar to
Your
candidates.
contributions, yes, but who they are could be displayed.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Who they are would
Friends
be.
of Councillor Burnside, to follow on the same example, an individual has to register who that is.
So that would be.
That individual's identity could appear in real time on a web page somewhere.
That's correct.
Okay. But if he was Friends of Councillor Burnside, just the one person registered would have to be there, or would he have to disclose his membership? It's me and 30 of my best friends who are billionaires, and we're the friends of. We'd just have the person who came in to register, wouldn't we?
So the MEA is clear that it is individuals, corporations, and trade unions that are allowed to register as third parties. So, I don't think that they would need to have multiple names involved in that registration process. If it's a corporation or a trade union, they'd need to have a representative of those organizations.
Okay, and I have one more question, because you've said to get to their contributions, we have to get to that point where we've got audited statements. And the same is true of disclosing our own direct donations to us as politicians and candidates. We don't get the donors disclosed until after the election, because they're not really confirmed as having donated until you've seen an audited statement.
That's correct.
The only thing stopping us from mirroring what happens in New York City and other cities, disclosing real time, is that we actually don't dedicate the resources. We have never made the decision to do pre-election day audits, so that information can be disclosed. I see I'm making people uncomfortable. I see head shaking, so I think you might like the tail end of my question. And the only reason we don't do that right now is because it's not really contemplated in the Act here in Ontario. Is that the case? The idea that we would accept deadlines by which we have pre-election day audits and then disclose whomever is doned up until that point.
That was your last question.
That's correct. That's not the regime that the Act contains. The Act sets out certain dates by which the forms, the contribution forms must be filed, and we have no ability to demand that they be filed prior to that time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McMahon?
Thank you very much. I just basically have one question. So candidates, to my knowledge, candidates can, if they run a business, advertise their business with their big mug shot on a billboard elsewhere for real estate, in my case, in my ward, for real estate, on a billboard. So they're able to do that as a candidate. You can advertise your business during an election period, once you've registered, or before you've registered, or during, after.
There are no prohibitions in the MEA that speak to that, Councillor.
So feasibly, as a candidate, you could have your signs up now for the election for your business, advertising yourself and your business. Then you can have signs up in May, beginning of May, from a third party. And then you can have your own signs up 25 days. Sorry, Councillor Grimes. And then you can have your own signs up 25 days before the election.
So to clarify, Councillor, if an individual currently has signs up advertising their business, they're allowed to do that, but they can't identify themselves as a candidate until May 1st, 2018.
Right, but it as you would agree that it's advertising yourself, getting your name and your face out there. So then say they declare May 1st, and they're third-party signs advertising themselves, and they can still have their business signs up, right? So they really, feasibly, you could have 3 different sets of signs that would be allowed up as a candidate.
So just to clarify your question, Councillor, candidates can't direct third-party advertising signage, and you can't really contribute or direct that. So whether or not someone is going to put a third-party ad up promoting or supporting a candidate, the candidate really has no control over that, theoretically, under the MEA.
Theoretically, but you could have 3 different types of signs up at 3 different periods of time promoting yourself. Someone's promoting you, but promoting the candidate.
I suppose conceptually that is true.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Layton to speak. Councillor Layton. Well, we only have time for one speaker. So Councillor Pasternak to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion. And it was similar to what was moved in Executive Committee, but it didn't carry. The City Council requests the Province of Ontario to provide an opt-out provision for municipalities from third-party advertising provisions in the Municipal Elections Act. And I mention all municipalities here rather than specifically the City of Toronto because I didn't want the province to think that this is Toronto again looking for special status. I mean, you've heard the questions and you heard the debate in Executive Committee, and there is no doubt that there's deep concern about the provisions of the legislation for third-party advertising. This is a bad idea. This is a terrible idea. And if anyone watches elections to our republic, in our republic to the south, they know that this leads to super PACs, dark money, corruption, and widespread manipulation of the electoral process. Moreover, we don't have the resources at the City of Toronto to enforce the various provisions of the proposed Municipal Elections Act. We would have to have dozens of staff to make sure that these third-party advertisers are following the rules, that they're playing fair, and that the result of which could be years of litigation, tying up the court system, tying up the compliance audit system, and of course could be potentially draining the accounts of various candidates as the litigation continues. This would lead to a financial Wild West, campaign chaos, and the extensive litigation that I've already described. So when it comes to bad ideas, this is a bad idea. Our electoral system is not perfect, but you know what? I've fought 3 elections under the Municipal Elections Act, with the first as the school board and then 2 times as councillor. It's as I said, it's not perfect, but it's pretty clean from a candidate's point of view, from an opponent's point of view, and to add this into it would just make a complete financial mess of it. It would corrupt it, it would darken it, and it would lead us down a road which we would all regret. So I think it's important that Council support a motion to send a strong message to the province that these provisions should be optional, that municipal councils across the province should be passing motions to opt out if they so wish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Recess till 6:30.